It was supposed to be a simple confession, just a few words spoken in a quiet courtroom, but those words would leave an entire room frozen in silence. I love my wife, and I refuse to let her go. The judge slowly lowered her glasses. The attorneys exchanged stunned glances. Reporters stopped typing. Even Maya Brooks, the woman standing across from him, looked as though the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Because the man who had just confessed his love wasn't just any husband. He was Elijah Carter, one of the youngest self-made billionaires in America. A man known for billion-dollar business deals, impossible negotiations, and a heart the public believed had long ago turned to stone. And the woman he was fighting for? She wasn't a socialite. She wasn't an heiress. She wasn't a celebrity. She was an emergency room nurse who had spent her life believing that honesty mattered more than money, and she had come to court that morning for one reason only: to end the biggest mistake of her life. Only, the man she accidentally married had no intention of signing the annulment papers. Not anymore. The silence inside the courtroom became almost unbearable. Maya tightened her grip on the folder in her hands. For months, she had rehearsed this day in her mind. Walk in, sign the papers, walk away, close the chapter. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry, she wouldn't argue, she wouldn't look back, but nothing had prepared her for Elijah's confession. His voice wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It carried no trace of manipulation, only regret. I should have told you the truth from the beginning, he continued, his eyes never leaving hers. I thought I could fix everything before you ever got hurt. Instead, I became the very person you were afraid I'd be. Maya felt her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Those words struck deeper than she wanted to admit, because they touched a wound that had existed long before Elijah Carter ever entered her life. A wound left by promises that had been broken over and over again. She had spent years convincing herself that if she never depended on anyone, no one would ever have the power to disappoint her. And yet somehow, standing across from this impossible man, she found herself wondering whether walking away would finally set her free, or leave her with a different kind of regret. What would you do if the biggest mistake of your life slowly became the person you couldn't imagine living without? Would you choose freedom? Or would you take one more chance on someone who had already broken your trust? Before you answer, stay with us. Because this isn't just another billionaire romance. It's a story about the consequences of one ordinary decision, the weight of unspoken truths, and the courage it takes to rebuild trust after it's been shattered. If you're new to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, welcome. Here, every story is about more than romance. It's about the choices we make, the lessons we learn, and the hope that people can grow when they take responsibility for their actions. If stories that touch your heart and leave you thinking long after they're over are your kind of stories, take a moment to subscribe, like this video, and let us know in the comments. Should love always get a second chance after trust has been broken? Your answer might change by the time this story ends. Now, let's go back to the day none of this was supposed to happen. Back to the ordinary morning when Maya Brooks walked into work believing she was starting another routine shift. She had no idea that before the sun set, one small act of kindness, one signature she barely thought twice about, would tie her life forever to a man whose world couldn't have been more different from hers. Sometimes people believe life changes because of grand decisions. It doesn't. More often, it changes because of one small moment we almost forget. And for Maya Brooks, that moment began with a confession she hadn't even heard yet. 5 months earlier, the shrill sound of an ambulance siren echoed through downtown Chicago as Maya Brooks hurried across the employee parking lot with a steaming cup of coffee in one hand and her hospital ID swinging from the other. She glanced at her watch. 6:47 a.m., 7 minutes before the start of another 12-hour shift. Perfect. She smiled to herself. For someone who had grown up in a home where everything seemed to happen 5 minutes too late, arriving early had become a quiet, personal victory. The automatic doors of Mercy General Hospital slid open, greeting her with the familiar scent of antiseptic, fresh coffee, and controlled chaos. Some people found hospitals depressing. Maya never had. To her, they represented hope. Every hallway held stories of second chances. Every room reminded her that life could change in an instant, for better or worse. As she tied her curly black hair into a neater ponytail and slipped on her navy blue scrub jacket, a voice called out behind her. "Morning, Maya. Ready for another circus?" She turned to see Denise Carter, one of the veteran nurses, balancing 2 patient charts under one arm. "When is it ever not?" Maya laughed. Denise grinned. Fair enough. The 2 women walked toward the emergency department together, exchanging light-hearted jokes before the serious work of the day began. Inside the nurses' station, monitors beeped steadily while doctors reviewed overnight reports. A young resident rubbed his tired eyes. An elderly volunteer pushed a cart filled with fresh blankets. Someone laughed at a joke from the far corner. Someone else quietly cried after receiving difficult news over the phone. Life, messy, Unpredictable. Beautiful. That was exactly why Maya loved her job. She wasn't there because it paid well. In truth, it didn't. After taxes, rent, student loan payments, and helping support her older brother Jordan while he searched for steady work, there wasn't much left at the end of each month. But money had never been the reason she became a nurse. She still remembered sitting beside her mother's hospital bed when she was 16. Watching overworked nurses offer kindness to complete strangers had changed something inside her. One nurse in particular had held her mother's hand during a frightening procedure while quietly whispering, "You're not alone." Those 3 simple words had stayed with Maya for years. People often underestimated kindness because it didn't appear on a receipt or bank statement. Yet sometimes it became the most valuable gift another person could receive. That belief shaped every shift she worked. She greeted every patient by name. She explained procedures patiently. She remembered birthdays whenever she could. She believed people deserved dignity, especially on the worst days of their lives. Around 9 o'clock that morning, the emergency department became unusually busy. A multi-car accident on Interstate 90 had filled nearly every trauma room. Doctors moved quickly. Stretchers rolled in one after another. Phones rang almost non-stop. Maya barely had time to sip the coffee she'd carried in hours earlier. As she adjusted an elderly patient's oxygen mask, the charge nurse approached. "Maya, Trauma Room 4 needs another set of hands." "I'm on my way." For the next 3 hours, she barely stopped moving. Checking 4 lines, calming frightened family members, helping physicians stabilize patients, offering reassuring smiles even when exhaustion tugged at every muscle in her body. By early afternoon, the rush finally began to ease. She leaned briefly against the nurse's station, stretching her aching shoulders. Denise handed her a bottle of water. "You ever think about slowing down?" Maya chuckled. "I'll rest when my student loans disappear." Denise laughed. "At this rate, you'll be 80. Probably." Despite the joke, Maya knew there was truth behind it. Her dream wasn't extravagant. She didn't dream about mansions or luxury vacations. She dreamed about opening a small community health clinic on Chicago's South Side, a place where people without good insurance could still receive compassionate care. She even kept a notebook in her apartment filled with sketches of waiting rooms, budgets, staffing plans, and fundraising ideas. Every extra dollar she saved went toward that dream. Some people collected expensive handbags. Maya collected hope. Later that afternoon, her phone buzzed inside her locker. "Jordan." She smiled before answering. "Hey. Please tell me you remember today." She frowned. "What did I forget?" "My job interview." Her eyes widened. "Oh my goodness. Jordan, I'm sorry." He laughed. "I knew you'd forget." "I didn't forget. I temporarily misplaced it." "Nice recovery." "So, how'd it go?" "I think pretty well." "I knew it would." There was a brief silence before Jordan spoke again. "You still planning to work overtime this weekend?" "I have to. You also need sleep." "I need rent money more." "Maya." She smiled softly. "I'm okay." "You always say that." "Because it's true." Was it? Mostly. She simply refused to let difficult circumstances become permanent excuses. Their father had done enough of that growing up. Whenever life became challenging, he'd disappear for weeks with promises that next time would be different. Eventually, Maya learned not to build her future on other people's promises. If she wanted something, she'd earn it herself. Depend on yourself. That lesson had protected her heart for years. She just didn't realize it would soon become the biggest obstacle to trusting someone else. At 4:30 that afternoon, Maya finally stepped outside for a few minutes of fresh air. Clouds drifted lazily across the summer sky. She closed her eyes, letting the warm breeze brush against her face. Peace, only for a moment. The emergency entrance doors suddenly burst open again. A black SUV came to an abrupt stop. Several men in tailored suits rushed around the vehicle. One of them shouted toward the entrance, "We need help, now!" Hospital staff immediately sprang into action. Maya opened her eyes and hurried back inside, unaware that the frantic arrival of one elderly patient was about to intertwine her life with someone she had never met. Before the day was over, she would perform one simple act of kindness, something she had done hundreds of times throughout her career. Only this time, the consequences would follow her for the rest of her life. The black SUV had barely come to a stop before hospital staff surrounded it. 2 paramedics swung open the rear door while a tall man in a charcoal grey suit stepped aside to make room. Though his face remained composed, the tension in his clenched jaw betrayed his fear. 78-year-old male, one of the paramedics called out as they wheeled the patient toward the emergency entrance. Chest pain, shortness of breath, possible cardiac event. Blood pressure is dropping. Maya grabbed the side rail of the stretcher and helped guide it through the sliding doors. "Trauma room 3 is ready," she said. The elderly man's breathing was shallow. His silver hair clung to his forehead with sweat, but despite the pain etched across his face, his eyes searched the room, as if looking for someone. "Elijah, too," he whispered weakly. "I'm right here, Grandpa." Maya looked up for the first time at the man walking beside the stretcher. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed, but what caught her attention wasn't the expensive suit or polished shoes. It was the look in his eyes. Fear. Raw, unmistakable fear. For a brief second, he wasn't a powerful executive or a wealthy businessman. He was simply a grandson terrified of losing the man who had raised him. "Let's move," the attending physician ordered. Within moments, the room transformed into organized urgency. Monitors beeped. Nurses moved with practiced precision. Doctors issued calm, rapid instructions. Maya attached monitoring leads, while another nurse started and forth. The elderly man reached for Elijah's hand. "You promised," he murmured. "I know," Elijah replied quietly. "Don't worry about that right now." His grandfather managed the faintest nod before closing his eyes as the medical team continued working. Maya noticed Elijah step back against the wall, giving the staff room to work. Unlike many anxious family members who peppered doctors with questions, he remained silent. His hands, however, told a different story. One was curled so tightly into a fist that his knuckles had turned white. Nearly an hour passed before the situation stabilized. Dr. Lisa Henderson stepped into the hallway. "Mr. Carter?" Elijah immediately stood. "How is he?" "He's stable for now, but his heart is extremely weak. We'll need to keep him under close observation." He exhaled slowly. "Can I see him?" "For a few minutes." "Thank you." As he turned to enter the room, Maya crossed the hallway carrying fresh supplies. Their eyes met for only a second. "Thank you," Elijah said sincerely. She smiled politely. "You don't have to thank me. It's my job." "No," he replied. "You treated my grandfather like he mattered." "He does matter." Those 4 words lingered with him long after she disappeared around the corner. Late that evening, Mercy General Hospital grew quieter. Visitors trickled out. Hallway lights dimmed. Only the steady rhythm of hospital life remained. Inside Samuel Carter's room, Elijah sat beside the bed. "I thought you'd be at the office," Samuel said weakly. "There isn't a meeting important enough to keep me away." Samuel gave a faint smile. "You always did know how to prioritize business." "I'm trying to learn how to prioritize people." His grandfather studied him for a moment. "You've spent years building a company." "I know, but who's been building your life?" Elijah didn't answer, because he couldn't. The silence itself was enough. Across town, headlines were already spreading online. Billionaire CEO Elijah Carter rushes grandfather to hospital. Reporters had gathered outside before sunset. Neither Elijah nor Samuel had noticed. Claire Donovan certainly had. The Carter family's longtime attorney stood near the hospital entrance, speaking quietly into her phone. "Yes," she said. "He's stable." A pause. "I understand." Another pause. "I'll discuss it with Mr. Carter tonight." She ended the call and looked back towards Samuel's room. Years earlier, Samuel had created an unusual provision in his estate plan. At the time, everyone had laughed, including Elijah. Now, with Samuel's health failing faster than expected, that forgotten clause had become painfully important. Claire wasn't worried about the money. She was worried about time. The next morning, Maya returned for another shift. She had almost forgotten about the elderly patient from the previous afternoon. Hospitals had a way of demanding your full attention every day. New emergencies replaced yesterday's crises. She checked overnight reports before Denise walked over. "Remember that gentleman from yesterday? The one with the heart attack?" Denise nodded. "Apparently he's someone important." Maya shrugged. "They're all important." Denise smiled. "I knew you'd say that." Maya looked up from her chart. "What difference does his bank account make if he's lying in a hospital bed?" "None." "Exactly." Later that afternoon, Claire Donovan approached the nurse's station carrying a folder. "Excuse me," she asked politely. "I'm looking for the attending nurse who helped Mr. Samuel Carter yesterday." Maya stepped forward. "That was me." Claire offered a grateful smile. "My client would like to express his appreciation." "That's kind of him." "There are also a few administrative forms regarding yesterday's emergency admission." Maya accepted the folder without giving it much thought. Hospitals generated mountains of paperwork every single day. Consent forms, witness signatures, insurance documents, emergency records, nothing unusual. Claire pointed to a highlighted section. "This simply confirms that you witnessed part of yesterday's emergency intake process." Maya scanned the page briefly. It looked similar to dozens of forms she'd signed throughout her career. "Right here?" she asked. Claire nodded. "Right there." Without hesitation, Maya signed her name, neatly, quickly, then handed the folder back. "There you go." "Thank you." Claire smiled, though something in her expression suggested relief more than gratitude. "I hope you have a wonderful day, Miss Brooks." "You too." Claire walked away, clutching the folder against her chest. From the second-floor window overlooking the lobby, Elijah happened to see the exchange. "What was that?" he asked, as Claire joined him a few minutes later. "Routine documentation." He accepted the answer without another question. Neither of them realized that a clerical mix-up, combined with the frantic legal preparations surrounding Samuel's estate, had just set in motion a chain of events no one intended. Maya returned to caring for patients. Elijah returned to his grandfather's bedside. The hospital carried on, as if nothing remarkable had happened. Yet somewhere inside that folder rested a single signature. An ordinary signature, placed on an ordinary afternoon. One that would soon bind two strangers together in a way neither of them could have imagined. Sometimes the decisions that change our lives don't feel important when we make them. Sometimes they don't even feel like decisions at all. Before we continue, take a moment to think about this. Have you ever made what seemed like a small, ordinary decision, only to realize later that it completely changed the direction of your life? Sometimes our biggest turning points don't come with warning signs. They arrive disguised as routine moments, a conversation, a kind gesture, or even a single signature. If this chapter has you wondering what happens next, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. And tell me, in the comments, do you believe one small decision can completely change a person's destiny, or do you think our lives are shaped by many little choices over time? I'd love to read your thoughts. Now, let's continue, because Maya has no idea that the signature she wrote in complete innocence is about to turn her entire world upside down. 3 days passed. For Maya Brooks, they were 3 perfectly ordinary days. She worked double shifts, checked on Jordan after his job interview, and spent her only evening off reviewing plans for the small community health clinic she still hoped to build one day. Nothing felt different. Nothing hinted that her life had already begun to change. On the other side of Chicago, however, nothing about Elijah Carter's week felt ordinary. His grandfather remained in a private hospital suite, stable but fragile. Doctors warned that any additional stress could trigger another cardiac episode. Elijah had barely left the hospital. Board meetings were handled through video calls. Contracts worth millions were signed from a laptop balanced on a bedside table. But none of it held his attention. His grandfather's condition weighed more heavily than any business decision ever had. Late Friday morning, Claire Donovan arrived carrying a thick leather folder. She knocked softly before entering. "Good morning." Elijah looked up from his computer. "You look worried." Claire closed the door behind her. "I am." Samuel Carter, sitting upright in bed, glanced between them. "What happened?" Claire hesitated. "It concerns the emergency paperwork from Monday." Elijah frowned. "What about it?" She slowly opened the folder. "Our legal team completed its review of the documents required to activate your grandfather's estate instructions." Samuel's smile faded. "And? There appears to have been a catastrophic administrative error." The room fell silent. Claire slid several documents across the bedside table. The emergency marriage authorization and the hospital witness documentation were mistakenly processed together during the electronic filing. Elijah stared at her. "I'm sorry." "What?" Claire inhaled carefully. "The county clerk processed the paperwork exactly as it was submitted." Samuel leaned forward despite the discomfort in his chest. "Processed what?" Claire looked directly at Elijah. "According to the state of Illinois." She paused. "You are legally married." For several long seconds, no one spoke. Then Elijah laughed. Not because it was funny, because it sounded impossible. "That's absurd." "I wish it were. There wasn't a ceremony. There didn't have to be under the emergency civil authorization your grandfather approved months ago." Samuel slowly removed his glasses. "I never intended." "I know," Claire interrupted gently. "The paperwork was meant only as a contingency if you became medically incapacitated before completing your final wishes." Elijah stood. "So who exactly am I supposedly married to?" Claire turned another page. "Ms. Maya Brooks." The name meant nothing to him. "Who is she?" "The emergency room nurse who assisted during your grandfather's admission." Elijah blinked. "The nurse?" The signatures were attached to the wrong filing packet before submission. He ran a hand across his face. "This can't possibly be legal." "It is. But it was a mistake." "Yes." "Then we fix it." Claire nodded. "Normally, yes." "But?" She looked toward Samuel before answering. The media has already obtained copies of the public filing. Elijah froze. What? They're preparing the story now. As if on cue, his phone vibrated across the bedside table, then vibrated again, and again. Within seconds, it was ringing continuously. His assistant, board members, journalists, friends. Finally, his communications director sent one simple message. Call me immediately. This story is everywhere. Across town, Maya was finishing her lunch break when Denise approached with a puzzled expression. There's someone asking for you. For me? Denise nodded. 2 lawyers. Maya laughed. I think they've got the wrong nurse. They specifically asked for Maya Brooks. Curious, Maya followed Denise toward one of the hospital's private consultation rooms. Inside sat a middle-aged man in a navy suit and a younger woman carrying an organized stack of files. Both stood politely when Maya entered. Ms. Brooks? Yes? My name is Richard Hale. He extended his hand. I'm an attorney representing the Carter family. Maya shook it politely. I'm sorry. Have I done something wrong? Not at all. We're actually here because of a legal misunderstanding. She smiled nervously. I think you've mistaken me for someone else. I don't believe we have. Richard gestured toward a chair. Would you mind sitting down? Something about his tone made her stomach tighten. She sat. The younger attorney placed a certified document on the table. Richard folded his hands. Ms. Brooks. He spoke slowly, choosing each word with care. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound unbelievable. Maya forced a small smile. I work in an emergency room. I've heard unbelievable before. He took a quiet breath. According to the official records of Cook County. He gently turned the document toward her. You are legally married to Mr. Elijah Carter. Maya stared at him, then laughed. I'm sorry. Neither attorney laughed. She looked from one face to the other. You're serious? Richard nodded. I'm afraid we are. The smile disappeared from Maya's face. She looked down at the certificate. Read her own name. Read Elijah Carter's name. Read the date, then read it again. No. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. No. This has to be fake. It isn't. I've never met this man. You met him briefly at Mercy General Hospital. I helped his grandfather. Yes. I didn't marry anyone. Richard slid another document across the table. This is the signature you provided. Maya looked at the familiar handwriting. Her own signature. Perfectly clear. Perfectly real. The room suddenly felt too small. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. One signature. One ordinary afternoon. One innocent act she barely remembered. How could something so simple become something so life-altering? For the first time in years, Maya felt the ground shift beneath her feet, and she had no idea how she was supposed to find her balance again. Maya sat in stunned silence long after the attorneys finished explaining the situation. The words made sense individually. Marriage, legal filing, administrative error, annulment. Yet together, they formed a reality that seemed impossible to accept. There has to be another explanation, she said, her voice trembling. People don't accidentally get married. Richard Hale nodded sympathetically. They usually don't. Then how did this happen? The emergency filing was processed alongside a time-sensitive legal packet prepared for the Carter family. Your signature, which was intended only as a witness acknowledgement, was mistakenly attached to the wrong document before it reached the county clerk. Maya rubbed her forehead. So, because someone made a filing mistake, the state recognizes you as legally married. She laughed softly. It wasn't amusement. It was disbelief. If I tell my brother this, he'll think I've completely lost my mind. Richard slid a business card across the table. Mr. Carter has requested to meet you. He believes you deserve a full explanation. When? This afternoon. Maya wanted to refuse. She wanted to walk back into the emergency room, finish her shift, and pretend none of this had happened. But pretending wouldn't make a legal marriage disappear. I'll meet him. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, a black sedan pulled up outside Mercy General Hospital. Maya climbed into the back seat without saying a word. The drive through downtown Chicago felt unusually long. She watched people crossing streets, couples walking hand in hand, children laughing in a nearby park. Everyone else's lives appeared normal. Hers suddenly felt unrecognizable. 20 minutes later, the car stopped outside the Carter Foundation headquarters, a modern glass building overlooking the Chicago River. This way, Richard said. He led her to a private conference room on the top floor. The room was elegant but understated. No gold decorations, no unnecessary luxury, just large windows, a polished wooden table, and shelves filled with books instead of awards. Maya barely had time to look around before the door opened. A man stepped inside. Tailored navy suit. Calm posture. Tired eyes she immediately recognized. The grandson from the hospital. Elijah Carter. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, Elijah broke the silence. "Miss Brooks." "Maya is fine." He nodded. "Maya." His voice carried none of the arrogance she had expected from someone whose name regularly appeared on business magazine covers. "I owe you an apology." She folded her arms. "For what, exactly?" "For all of this." He gestured toward the paperwork on the table. "I never intended for your life to be turned upside down." She studied him carefully. "If you're about to tell me this was all part of some elaborate plan, we're done." "It wasn't. I don't even know you." "I know. And, somehow, I'm your wife?" The words sounded absurd even as she said them. Elijah gave a weary smile. "They sound just as ridiculous to me." For the first time since the attorneys had arrived at the hospital, Maya felt a tiny crack in her anger. He looked just as overwhelmed as she felt. She pulled out a chair and sat. "So, what now?" Elijah sat across from her. "My attorneys have already started preparing the paperwork to request an annulment." She exhaled with relief. "Good. It should resolve everything." "Should? There may be some delays." "What kind of delays?" Before Elijah could answer, Claire entered carrying a tablet. "I'm afraid the delays have already begun." She placed the screen on the table. A news website filled the display. "Billionaire CEO secretly marries Chicago nurse." Another headline appeared underneath. "Who is Maya Brooks? The mystery woman who stole America's most eligible bachelor." Maya's face drained of color. "Oh no." Claire swiped again. Television clips, social media posts, photographs of Maya leaving the hospital, images of Elijah entering the courthouse months earlier for unrelated business. Comment sections filled with speculation. "They're making up an entire relationship," Maya whispered. "They don't know the truth," Claire replied. "And until the court officially rules on the annulment, every public record identifies you as Mr. Carter's wife." Maya pushed the tablet away. "I didn't ask for this." "I know. I have patience. My co-workers, my neighbors, they're all going to think." She couldn't finish the sentence. Elijah quietly slid a box of tissues toward her. "I know this doesn't fix anything," he said, "but I am truly sorry." She looked at him. "Why are you apologizing?" "Because even though I didn't cause the mistake, its consequences are affecting you far more than they're affecting me." The honesty caught her off guard. Most powerful people she'd encountered were quick to defend themselves. Elijah wasn't. He wasn't making excuses. He was acknowledging the impact. There was a long silence. Finally, Maya asked, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. If this gets fixed." He nodded. "We go back to being strangers?" A faint sadness crossed his face. "That was my assumption." She nodded slowly. "It should be mine too." Neither of them noticed the thoughtful expression on Claire's face. Sometimes people entered a room as strangers. Sometimes they left with lives forever connected. Not because they planned it, but because circumstances forced them to see each other's humanity. Outside the conference room, reporters had already begun gathering near the building's entrance. Camera crews adjusted their equipment. Microphones waited. Questions were ready. Inside, Maya stood. "I should go." Elijah walked her to the door. "I'm sorry we met this way." She looked at him for a moment before answering. "So am I." As the elevator doors closed between them, both believed they had just shared a brief, unfortunate encounter that would soon become nothing more than an embarrassing story. Neither realized that the real challenge wasn't ending an accidental marriage. It was surviving everything that would happen before they finally had the chance. The next morning, Maya woke before sunrise. For the first few seconds, everything felt normal. The soft hum of her bedroom fan, the pale morning light slipping through the curtains, the familiar creak of the old apartment building as another tenant walked down the hallway. Then she remembered. She was legally married, not because she had fallen in love, not because she had stood before family and friends exchanging vows, but because of a signature she had believed was nothing more than routine paperwork. She let out a slow breath and reached for her phone. 23 missed calls. 48 unread text messages. Hundreds of social media notifications. Her stomach tightened. One message from her brother stood out. "Jordan, turn on the news. Right now. Then call me." She didn't need to. She already knew what she would see. Instead, she called him. He answered before the first ring finished. "Maya, please tell me this is some kind of joke." "I wish it were." "You got married?" "No." "You didn't?" "Apparently I did." Jordan sighed loudly. I have absolutely no idea what that means. Neither do I. She spent the next 20 minutes explaining everything, from Samuel Carter's emergency admission to the paperwork mix-up. When she finally finished, Jordan was silent. So, you believe me? I believe you wouldn't hide something like this. She smiled weakly. Thanks. But I also believe you're in the middle of a nightmare. I know. Are they fixing it? They're trying. Jordan's voice became serious. Maya, yeah? Don't let anyone pressure you into anything because they're rich. His words lingered after the call ended. Money had a way of changing how people behaved. She had seen families argue over inheritances while loved ones were still alive. She had watched people mistake wealth for wisdom. She promised herself that no matter how powerful Elijah Carter was, she would never allow herself to be intimidated. Across the city, Elijah's morning was no less chaotic. By 8 o'clock, his executive conference room was full. Public relations advisors, corporate attorneys, board members, communications staff. Every television in the room displayed the same headline. America's most eligible billionaire, secretly married. One board member cleared his throat. We need to issue a statement. Another disagreed. Any statement could complicate the legal proceedings. A third looked directly at Elijah. Investors are asking questions. Elijah remained unusually quiet. Finally, he spoke. Has anyone asked how Ms. Brooks is doing? The room fell silent. His communications director answered carefully. We've been focused on the company. I noticed. No one responded. Elijah stood and walked toward the window overlooking Chicago. My grandfather is recovering. My company is stable. But somewhere across this city, a woman who never asked for any of this is having her life turned upside down. He turned back toward the room. That should concern us just as much. For the first time that morning, no one mentioned stock prices. By lunchtime, Maya discovered just how quickly public attention could invade a private life. A reporter waited outside the hospital. Another approached her in the parking lot. Ms. Brooks. She kept walking. Did you know Mr. Carter before the marriage? No answer. Are the rumors true that you're moving into his mansion? She continued toward the entrance. What do you say to people who think you planned this? That question stopped her. Not because she intended to answer, because it hurt. She looked at the young reporter. I became a nurse to help people. Her voice was calm. I didn't choose this story. Then she walked inside. Denise met her near the nurse's station. You okay? I will be. You don't have to pretend with me. Maya smiled gratefully. That's exactly why you're my favorite coworker. Denise laughed. Don't let the others hear that. That afternoon, Claire Donovan requested another meeting. This time, it wasn't at Carter headquarters. It was at a quiet law office, away from reporters. Claire greeted both Maya and Elijah with a stack of fresh documents. I've spoken with the judge handling the annulment. Maya leaned forward. When can this finally be over? Claire hesitated. There are complications. Elijah frowned. What kind? The publicity. Maya blinked. What does that have to do with anything? Claire folded her hands. The court wants to ensure neither party is acting under outside pressure. So? The earliest hearing available is 6 weeks from now. 6 weeks? Maya exclaimed. Claire nodded. I'm afraid so. The room fell silent. Elijah was the first to speak. The media won't leave her alone for 6 weeks. No, Claire admitted. They probably won't. She looked at both of them before continuing. I've discussed several options with the court. And? Maya asked. Claire took a careful breath. The judge believes maintaining a consistent public narrative until the hearing may reduce speculation and prevent additional legal complications. I don't understand. Claire looked directly at Maya. They're recommending that, publicly, the two of you avoid contradicting your legal marital status until the hearing. Maya stared at her. You mean? Elijah finished the sentence. They want us to appear married. Claire gave a reluctant nod. Maya immediately shook her head. Absolutely not. I understand your reaction. No, Maya said firmly. You don't. She stood and paced across the room. I've spent my entire life trying to build an honest reputation. I can't pretend to be someone's wife. Elijah quietly rose from his chair. I agree with her. Maya looked at him, surprised. I won't ask Ms. Brooks to live a lie, he said. Claire sighed. I expected both of you to feel that way. She closed the folder. Then we need another solution. None of them realized that finding one would prove far more difficult than anyone imagined. Outside the office, camera shutters clicked as soon as the doors opened. Without thinking, Elijah stepped slightly in front of Maya, shielding her from the crowd. It was a simple gesture, instinctive, Protective, Maya noticed. So did every photographer on the sidewalk. By evening, that single photograph would appear on news websites across the country with a headline neither of them wanted. A billionaire protects his wife from the cameras. Neither of them knew it yet. But pretending not to care about each other was about to become much harder than either expected. The photograph spread across the internet faster than either of them could have imagined. One image. One brief moment. Elijah, standing slightly in front of Maya as reporters crowded around them. To strangers, it looked protective. To gossip websites, it looked romantic. To Maya, it was simply a man trying to stop cameras from being shoved into her face. But the truth rarely traveled as quickly as a good headline. By the next morning, Mercy General Hospital had become a media hotspot. Hospital administrators were forced to assign extra security near the emergency entrance after reporters began waiting outside before sunrise. As Maya entered through the employee entrance, several of her co-workers looked up from the nurses' station. Some smiled warmly, others looked curious. A few avoided the subject altogether. Finally, Denise broke the silence. "You don't owe anyone an explanation." Maya gave her a grateful smile. "I appreciate that." "But what? If you ever need someone to vent to, my office has excellent coffee." Maya laughed for the first time in days. "Now, that's the best offer I've heard all week." Denise leaned against the counter. "You know what's interesting?" "What?" "Not once have I heard you complain about that man." Maya paused. "I don't know him well enough to complain about him." "Exactly." She thought about that during the rest of her shift. Everything she disliked about the situation had nothing to do with Elijah himself. It was the chaos, the attention, the uncertainty, not the man. That realization surprised her. Across the city, Elijah stood in his grandfather's hospital room, watching Samuel slowly finish breakfast. "You look exhausted," Samuel observed. "I didn't sleep much." "Because of business?" Elijah shook his head. "No." Samuel smiled knowingly. "The nurse. Maya. So you've learned her name." "I had to." Samuel became serious. "I never wanted an innocent woman dragged into our family's affairs." "I know. If she resents you." "I wouldn't blame her." Samuel looked out the window for a long moment. "Do you know what your grandmother used to tell me?" Elijah smiled faintly. "Probably. Character isn't revealed when life is easy. It's revealed when someone else's mistake becomes your burden." Elijah remembered those words. He had heard them as a teenager. Back then, they had sounded like simple wisdom. Now they felt deeply personal. That afternoon, Claire called both Maya and Elijah. "I've found a temporary solution." "What kind of solution?" Maya asked cautiously. "The media." Neither answered. Claire continued. "They're following both of you because nobody knows the truth. The more you avoid each other, the more aggressive the speculation becomes." "I still don't understand," Maya admitted. "The judge isn't asking you to pretend to be happily married." She paused. "But if you can attend a few public legal meetings together and avoid contradicting one another publicly, the situation may calm down before the hearing." Elijah looked at Maya. "I'm willing if you are." She sighed. "I don't have much of a choice, do I?" "No," Claire admitted honestly. "You don't." Their first scheduled meeting took place 2 days later at the Carter Foundation. Reporters gathered outside again. This time, both knew exactly what to expect. As Maya stepped from the car, dozens of voices called her name. She instinctively froze. Elijah noticed immediately. "You ready?" She looked toward the crowd. "Not even a little." "You don't have to answer anyone." "I know. If it gets overwhelming." He hesitated. "Just stay beside me." She searched his face for any hint of arrogance. There wasn't any, only quiet reassurance. Without another word, they walked toward the entrance together. Camera flashes exploded around them. "Mr. Carter! Mrs. Carter! Are you two honeymooning after the legal proceedings?" Neither answered. Inside the building, the heavy glass doors finally closed behind them. The sudden silence felt almost shocking. Maya let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "How do you live like this?" Elijah shrugged. "You don't. You just get used to it." "I don't think I ever could." "Neither did I." She looked at him. "You didn't?" "I spent years hoping people would stop talking about my money long enough to ask who I actually was." His answer lingered with her. For the first time, she considered what life might actually be like for someone the entire world believed they already understood. After the meeting, Elijah surprised her. "I owe you lunch." She frowned. "You don't owe me anything. I dragged you through an hour of legal meetings." "Fair point. There isn't a camera, Within 5 blocks of a small diner I know. She raised an eyebrow. A billionaire eats at diners? He smiled. My grandfather believed expensive food often tastes worse. She laughed. I'm beginning to like your grandfather. So do I. They drove separately, but met at a modest neighborhood restaurant tucked between a bookstore and a florist. No reporters, no photographers, no curious stares. Just the smell of fresh coffee and grilled sandwiches. For the first time since everything began, they spoke like ordinary people. Not accidental spouses, not public figures, just 2 strangers sharing a meal. Maya learned Elijah hated olives. Elijah learned Maya collected second-hand books because she loved notes previous owners left in the margins. She told him about her dream of opening a community clinic. He listened without checking his phone once. When she apologized for talking so much, he shook his head. No one's talked to me about something they genuinely love in a long time. And what do people usually talk to you about? Business. Money. What they want. And what do you want? The question caught him off guard. He looked down at his untouched coffee before answering. I honestly don't know anymore. It was the most truthful thing he'd said all week. Maya didn't offer advice. She simply listened. Sometimes that was enough. As they left the diner an hour later, neither noticed the elderly waitress smiling from the window. She turned to another employee and quietly said, "Those 2 don't look like people pretending to care about each other." Outside, the afternoon sun bathed the quiet street in warm light. Their problems hadn't disappeared. The annulment hearing was still weeks away. The media was still waiting. The uncertainty still hung over both their lives. But somewhere between hospital hallways, legal meetings, and a simple lunch at a neighborhood diner, they had taken the first step towards something neither of them expected. Not love. Not yet. Just understanding. And sometimes, understanding is where every meaningful relationship begins. The following Monday began with an unexpected invitation. Maya had just finished checking on an elderly patient when her phone vibrated. It was Claire Donovan. Good morning, Maya. Morning. I hope I'm not interrupting. You caught me during my break. Claire hesitated. I have a favor to ask. Maya smiled faintly. I've learned that whenever someone starts a sentence that way, it usually isn't a small favor. Claire laughed softly. You're probably right. What is it? The Carter Foundation is hosting its annual Community Health Initiative tomorrow evening. I've heard of it. For years, the foundation has donated millions of dollars to hospitals and neighborhood clinics across Chicago. Maya nodded. So, the media is planning to cover the event. Her smile disappeared. I already know where this is going. We're hoping you and Elijah can attend together. Maya sighed. Claire. What? I know. I truly do. But if the 2 of you appear calm and cooperative, the attention surrounding the marriage may finally begin to settle. Maya remained quiet. Claire continued. You won't be pretending to be in love. You'll simply be attending an event that directly supports the kind of healthcare you've spent your career providing. That part caught Maya's attention. Community clinics? Yes. Free health screenings. Mobile medical units. Scholarships for nursing students. For the first time, Maya found herself genuinely interested. When does it start? 6 tomorrow evening. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking. That evening, Elijah sat beside his grandfather's hospital bed while helping him complete a crossword puzzle. Samuel smiled after filling in another answer. You've always been terrible at these. I built a logistics company. You still can't figure out 5-letter words. Elijah chuckled. I'll leave the crossword championships to you. Samuel folded the newspaper. Claire told me about tomorrow. She tells you everything. Only the things that matter. Elijah leaned back in his chair. I don't want Maya to feel obligated. Samuel nodded. Good. What do you mean? If you're already thinking about what she feels, instead of what's convenient for you. He smiled knowingly. Then you're becoming the man I hoped you'd become. Elijah looked away. This isn't about feelings. No. No. It's about responsibility. Samuel didn't argue. Instead, he quietly changed the subject. When your grandmother and I first met, I judged her completely wrong. You've told me. I thought she was stubborn. Weren't you right? Samuel laughed. She was. But I mistook strength for pride. He looked at Elijah. Don't make the mistake of deciding who someone is before you've seen how they treat people who can do nothing for them. Those words stayed with Elijah long after visiting hours ended. The next evening, Maya arrived at the Carter Foundation wearing a simple emerald green dress she had owned for years. It wasn't designer. It wasn't expensive. But it made her feel confident. As she stepped from the car, she noticed photographers waiting behind security barriers. Her shoulders instinctively tensed. Then she heard a familiar voice. "You came." She turned. Elijah stood near the entrance in a dark navy suit. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. "You seem surprised," Maya said. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't. What changed your mind?" She smiled slightly. "I read about the foundation. And? I wanted to see whether the headlines were true." He raised an eyebrow. "About the donations?" "Oh." He smiled. "They are." Before either of them could continue, Claire approached. "Thank you both for coming." She adjusted Maya's name badge. "The speeches begin in 15 minutes. Inside, the ballroom buzzed with quiet conversation. Doctors, nurses, community leaders, volunteers, medical students. Large display boards showed photographs of free vaccination clinics, mobile health vans, and neighborhood outreach programs funded by the Carter Foundation. Maya slowly walked from one display to another. She stopped in front of a photograph showing children receiving vision screenings. "These are real?" she asked. Elijah nodded. "Last summer," she looked at another display. "A free maternity clinic? Opened 6 months ago. You paid for this?" "The foundation did." She turned toward him. "Why doesn't anyone know?" He shrugged. "Because helping people isn't supposed to be advertising." His answer surprised her. She had expected polished public relations talking points. Instead, he sounded almost uncomfortable discussing his own philanthropy. An older volunteer approached, carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water. "Mr. Carter." "Mrs. Carter." Maya instinctively opened her mouth to explain. Then she remembered Claire's advice. She simply smiled politely. After the volunteer walked away, Elijah looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "The title." She laughed softly. "You didn't invent it." "No. But I know it must feel strange." "It does." There was a brief silence. Finally, Maya asked the question she'd been wondering since the hospital. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything. With all your money." He smiled. "I had a feeling this question was coming." "Why? Spend so much on healthcare?" His expression changed. He looked toward one of the photographs hanging across the room. "My mother died waiting for treatment she couldn't get quickly enough." Maya's eyes widened. "I didn't know." "Most people don't." He spoke quietly. "My grandfather built a successful business. But after my mother died, he told me something I'll never forget." "What was it?" "Money can't erase yesterday." He paused. "But it can make tomorrow easier for someone else." Maya looked around the room again. The scholarship recipients, the volunteer physicians, the free clinics. Suddenly, the foundation no longer felt like a billionaire's public image project. It felt personal, very personal. Just then, the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the room grew quiet. "Tonight we celebrate the thousands of lives changed through community healthcare." As applause filled the ballroom, Maya glanced toward Elijah. For days, she had seen only the headlines. The billionaire, the accidental husband, the center of a media storm. Tonight, for the first time, she was beginning to see the man behind the label. And somewhere across the room, Elijah noticed something too. Maya hadn't asked him a single question about his wealth. She had only asked about the people he was trying to help. For reasons he couldn't quite explain. That mattered to him more than she could possibly know. The applause faded as the evening's keynote speaker welcomed the guests. Instead of delivering a speech about financial success or corporate achievements, the presenter invited several scholarship recipients to share their stories. One by one, they stepped onto the stage. A young nursing student spoke about becoming the first person in her family to attend college. A physician described how a mobile clinic funded by the Carter Foundation had helped detect cancer early in dozens of uninsured patients. An elderly veteran fought back tears as he explained that a free cardiac screening had likely saved his life. Maya listened quietly. She had attended dozens of charity events over the years. Many were little more than elegant dinners with oversized donation checks and carefully rehearsed speeches. This felt different. The focus wasn't on the donors. It was on the people whose lives had changed. As the final speaker returned to her seat, the audience stood in applause. Maya glanced toward Elijah. He hadn't once looked toward the cameras. His attention remained fixed on the people on stage. "You've seen these stories before," she whispered. He nodded. "I try to attend every year." "Why?" "Because numbers can become dangerous." She looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "In business, it's easy to measure everything by profit, growth, or percentages." He smiled faintly. "But when I come here, those numbers become faces." Maya thought about that long after the lights dimmed for dinner. Later that evening, guests mingled throughout the ballroom. Claire was speaking with hospital administrators, while Elijah introduced Maya to several non-profit directors. Each conversation surprised her. No one treated her like a celebrity. No one seemed interested in gossip. Instead, they asked about her work. What challenges do emergency departments face most? One director asked, if you had more funding, where would you invest it first? Another wondered. For nearly 30 minutes, Maya spoke passionately about preventive healthcare, neighborhood education programs, and expanding access to primary care. Elijah remained unusually quiet. He simply listened. Eventually, one of the board members smiled. I haven't heard someone speak about community medicine with that much conviction in years. After the group dispersed, Elijah turned toward Maya. I've been looking at healthcare through financial reports. And? You made me realize I should probably spend more time listening to the people actually doing the work. She laughed. Trust me. The paperwork never tells the whole story. No, it doesn't. As the evening came to an end, guests began leaving. Outside, a light summer rain had started falling. Valet attendants hurried between parked cars carrying umbrellas. Maya stood beneath the entrance canopy. I didn't bring one. Elijah accepted an umbrella from an attendant. We're parked in the same direction. She hesitated. I don't want another headline. You probably won't avoid one. He smiled apologetically. But at least you don't have to get soaked. For a second, she considered refusing. Old habits told her to handle everything alone. Then she remembered something one of her nursing instructors had once said. Accepting kindness isn't weakness. It's allowing someone else the opportunity to be kind. She smiled. Okay. They walked together through the rain. The umbrella wasn't large enough. By the time they reached the parking area, both were laughing after a gust of wind had blown rain across their shoulders. I think this umbrella gave up halfway here, Maya joked. It recognized Chicago weather. I can't blame it. For the first time since they had met, the conversation felt effortless. Not because their problems had disappeared, but because neither of them was pretending to be someone else. Before Maya climbed into her car, Elijah spoke. Can I ask you something? She leaned against the door. Sure, when all of this is over. He paused. Do you think you'll still open that clinic? She didn't answer immediately. I hope so. You don't sound convinced. She looked toward the rain-soaked pavement. Dreams become expensive, and life keeps getting in the way. He nodded slowly. My grandfather used to tell me something similar. What was that? He said people often confuse delaying a dream with abandoning it. She smiled. I like your grandfather. So does everyone who actually meets him. She looked back at Elijah. I judged you before I knew you. So did I. You did? I assumed you'd hate me. She laughed softly. I've considered it. Fair. But... She searched for the right words. I don't think you're responsible for what happened. Relief quietly crossed his face. Thank you. That doesn't mean I'm happy about being accidentally married. I wouldn't expect you to be. They both laughed. The laughter lasted only a few seconds. Yet somehow, it eased the tension that had followed them for weeks. Across the parking lot, hidden behind a row of vehicles, a freelance photographer lowered his camera. He had captured dozens of images. Not dramatic ones. No embraces. No kisses. Just two people standing beneath a small umbrella, talking and laughing without noticing the rain. Sometimes ordinary moments told the strongest stories. Unfortunately, they could also tell the wrong story when viewed without context. The next morning, another headline spread across the internet. Are the Carters falling in love? Insiders say their chemistry is undeniable. Maya sighed the moment she saw it. Elijah shook his head when Claire forwarded the article. Neither knew whether to laugh or be frustrated. But one thing had quietly changed. For the first time since the accidental marriage, neither of them felt like complete strangers anymore. They still intended to end the marriage. They still planned to move on with their separate lives. Yet somewhere between hospital hallways, community clinics, heartfelt conversations, and a walk through the rain, they had begun building something unexpected. Not romance. Not yet. Something far more important. Respect. And every lasting relationship, whether friendship or love, begins with the willingness to see another person as they truly are, not as the world assumes them to be. The rainstorm that had drenched Chicago the night before left the city unusually calm. Sunlight reflected off the wet sidewalks as Maya walked into Mercy General Hospital, carrying her usual cup of coffee. For the first time in weeks, no reporters stood outside the entrance. She almost smiled. Almost. Inside the emergency department, however, life had already resumed its familiar rhythm. A child with a broken wrist, an elderly woman complaining of chest pain, a construction worker needing stitches after an accident. The hospital reminded Maya that while the world had become fascinated with her personal life, most people were simply trying to make it through another ordinary day. She preferred it that way. "Good morning, celebrity." Denise handed her a patient's chart with an exaggerated grin. Maya rolled her eyes. "If you call me that one more time, I'm switching shifts." Denise laughed. "I couldn't resist. I've had enough attention to last a lifetime." "I know." Her smile softened. "I'm glad you're here." "So am I." There was comfort in routine, checking vital signs, listening to worried families, offering reassurance to frightened patients. Every familiar task reminded Maya who she was beyond the headlines. By lunchtime, she had almost forgotten about the outside world. Then, her phone vibrated. It was Elijah. She stared at the screen. They had exchanged numbers only because Claire insisted they might need to coordinate legal appointments. This was the first time he had called directly. After a moment, she answered. "Hello?" "Hi, Maya." His voice sounded hesitant. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "I'm on my lunch break." "Good." A brief silence followed. "I have a question." "Okay. Do you remember mentioning your community clinic?" She smiled. "I've mentioned it once." "I remember. I've been thinking about it." She leaned back in her chair. "That's unexpected. I'd like to see the neighborhood you're hoping to serve." She frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to keep funding healthcare projects, I should understand what people actually need." "You don't need my permission for that." "I know. But I'd rather learn from someone who lives it every day." His answer caught her off guard. Most wealthy donors wanted presentations, charts, financial reports. Elijah wanted a tour. "When?" "Whenever you're comfortable." She considered it. "Saturday morning." "I'll be there." Saturday arrived bright and warm. Maya waited outside an aging brick community center on Chicago's south side. The neighborhood wasn't dangerous. It was simply overlooked. Old storefronts stood beside vacant lots. A small grocery store struggled to stay open. Children played basketball in a cracked parking lot. At exactly 10 o'clock, a dark SUV pulled to the curb. Elijah stepped out wearing jeans, running shoes, and a simple navy polo shirt. No designer suit, no security detail, no expensive watch. Maya looked him up and down. "You clean up differently on weekends." He smiled. "I was told this wasn't a board meeting." "It definitely isn't." As they began walking, Maya pointed toward an abandoned building. "That's where I'd like the clinic." He stopped. "The old pharmacy?" "It closed 12 years ago." "What happened?" "The neighborhood lost its only primary care office." She continued walking. "Now people travel nearly 40 minutes for basic medical care." Elijah looked around carefully. He wasn't seeing property values. He was seeing families. "You've done your homework." She laughed. "I've been planning this since nursing school." They spent the next 2 hours walking through the neighborhood. Maya introduced him to local pastors, teachers, and small business owners. Everyone knew her. Everyone greeted her by name. An elderly barber stepped outside his shop. "Morning, Miss Brooks." "Morning, Mr. Lewis." "You finally taking a day off?" "I'm trying." Mr. Lewis looked toward Elijah. "And who's your friend?" Maya hesitated only briefly. "This is Elijah." Mr. Lewis extended his hand. "Anyone walking around with Maya must be decent." Elijah shook it warmly. "I hope I earn that opinion." "You'll have to." As they continued, Maya smiled. "What?" "You didn't tell him who you were." "I didn't think it mattered. It probably would have impressed him." "I'm not trying to impress anyone." She looked at him thoughtfully. The comment seemed genuine. Around noon, they stopped at a neighborhood diner. Nothing fancy. Just homemade soup, sandwiches, and the smell of fresh cornbread drifting from the kitchen. The owner, Mrs. Robinson, greeted Maya with a hug. "Your usual?" "You know me too well." Mrs. Robinson smiled toward Elijah. "And for your friend?" "I'll have whatever she's having." "You trust her taste already?" Elijah glanced at Maya. "I do." During lunch, Maya pulled a worn notebook from her bag. The edges were bent. Several pages were held together with tape. She placed it on the table. "This is the clinic." Elijah opened it carefully. Hand-drawn floor plans, volunteer schedules, budget estimates, fundraising ideas. Pages filled with handwritten notes dating back almost 10 years. "You've carried this around all this time?" She nodded. "Every time I learn something new, I add to it." He slowly turned another page. Children's health programs, prenatal care, mental health counseling, nutrition workshops. This isn't just a clinic. "No. It's a community." Maya smiled. "That's the idea." For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Elijah closed the notebook gently. I've spent years approving healthcare budgets. He looked directly at her. I've never seen someone care this deeply about what those numbers actually become. Maya lowered her eyes. My mother used to say that people deserve dignity long before they deserve sympathy. He nodded slowly. I think she was right. Outside the diner window, neighborhood children chased one another across the sidewalk, laughing without a care in the world. Maya watched them quietly. That's why this matters. So they grow up believing healthcare belongs to them too. Elijah followed her gaze. In that moment, he understood something no annual report had ever taught him. Money could build a building. But only people with compassion could turn it into a place that changed lives. And for the first time since their accidental marriage began, he stopped seeing Maya as the woman connected to an impossible legal mistake. He saw her as someone whose purpose made everyone around her better. Without realizing it, admiration had quietly taken root. Not because of who she was to him, but because of who she was to everyone else. When they stepped out of the diner, the afternoon sun had warmed the sidewalks. Children still laughed in the small playground across the street. An elderly woman watered flowers in front of her apartment building. A city bus rumbled past, carrying people home from work. It wasn't an extraordinary neighborhood. It was simply home. Maya locked eyes with a little girl sitting on the library steps, reading a picture book. That's Ava, she said. She comes here almost every Saturday. You know everyone. Maya smiled. I try to. As they continued walking, Elijah noticed something he hadn't expected. Every few minutes, someone stopped Maya. A father thanked her for helping his son after an asthma attack. A grandmother hugged her because she'd stayed long after her shift ended, while her husband recovered from surgery. A high school student proudly introduced Maya to his younger sister, explaining that Maya had inspired him to apply for nursing school. None of those people mentioned the headlines. None cared about her accidental marriage. To them, she wasn't connected to a billionaire. She was simply Maya. By the time they reached the old pharmacy building again, Elijah had become unusually quiet. What are you thinking? Maya asked. He looked at the weathered brick walls. I've spent years measuring success. In dollars? He nodded. In company growth, market expansion, annual reports. He paused before continuing. But today... He looked around the neighborhood. I realized something. What? You've already built something successful. She frowned. I haven't built anything. You've built trust. She looked at him, surprised. You walk down these streets, and people smile because you've shown up for them when they needed someone. He smiled gently. You can't buy that. For a moment, Maya didn't know what to say. Compliments had always made her uncomfortable, especially honest ones. My mother used to tell me something, she said softly. What? If people remember your kindness longer than your accomplishments, you've lived well. Elijah nodded. I think she was a wise woman. So do I. On Monday morning, Elijah arrived at Carter Global's headquarters, carrying Maya's notebook in his briefcase. He had asked permission to borrow it over the weekend. She agreed on one condition. You bring it back exactly the way you found it. I promise. Now he placed it carefully on the conference table as senior executives entered the room. One by one, they took their seats. Good morning, everyone, Elijah began. I've decided we're changing how we evaluate our community investments. Several executives exchanged puzzled glances. The chief financial officer spoke first. How so? Elijah opened Maya's notebook. For years, we've approved projects based almost entirely on financial reports. He turned several pages. Starting today, every proposal must include direct conversations with the communities involved. Silence filled the room. One executive finally asked, where did this come from? Elijah smiled. Someone reminded me that spreadsheets don't tell human stories. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. When it ended, several executives approached the notebook with genuine curiosity. One quietly said, we've overlooked this perspective. Another nodded. We should have been asking these questions years ago. As everyone left, Elijah closed the notebook carefully. Without realizing it, Maya had already influenced decisions that would affect thousands of people. Meanwhile, Maya's own week became increasingly busy. The hospital announced a free weekend health fair. Volunteers were needed. Doctors quickly signed up. So did nurses. Maya added her name without hesitation. Late Thursday afternoon, her supervisor approached. We're still short on volunteers. I'll stay later if needed. I figured you'd say that. Just then, her phone buzzed. A message from Elijah. Claire told me about the health fair. Do you still need volunteers? Maya smiled. She replied, always. His response came almost immediately. What time should I be there? Saturday morning arrived with clear skies. The parking lot outside the community center slowly filled with families. Tables were arranged for blood pressure screenings, diabetes education, nutrition counseling, and children's wellness checks. Maya was organizing supplies when she noticed a familiar SUV pulling into the lot. Elijah stepped out wearing jeans, sneakers, and a plain blue volunteer t-shirt. No designer labels, no assistants. Just a volunteer badge with his first name printed across the front. Denise blinked. "Is that?" Maya nodded. "Yes." "The billionaire?" "The same one." Denise stared. "He's carrying folding tables." Maya laughed. "He volunteered. I don't think I've ever seen a billionaire assemble tents." "Neither have I." Within minutes, Elijah was helping unload medical equipment. He carried chairs, moved boxes, directed traffic. When an elderly gentleman struggled to reach the registration table, Elijah walked beside him instead of pointing the way. Nobody asked who owned the largest company in the room. They simply appreciated another pair of willing hands. Around lunchtime, a young boy accidentally spilled juice across one of the registration tables. The child froze. "I'm sorry." His mother looked embarrassed. Before anyone else could react, Elijah grabbed paper towels. "No problem." He knelt beside the boy. "Looks like teamwork time." Together, they cleaned the table. The little boy smiled. "We fixed it." "We sure did." Across the room, Maya watched quietly. There were no cameras, no reporters, no shareholders, no audience. Just people helping people. Later that afternoon, as volunteers packed away the remaining supplies, Denise walked over to Maya. "I owe someone an apology." "Who?" "Myself." Maya laughed. "What does that mean?" "I assumed your accidental husband was another rich guy trying to protect his image." She looked toward Elijah, who was helping fold the last canopy tent. "I think I was wrong." Maya followed her gaze. "So did I." As the sun began to set, Elijah carried the final box into the storage room. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and smiled. "I haven't worked this hard in years." Maya handed him a bottle of water. "You also haven't complained once." He accepted it gratefully. "I had good company." For a brief moment, they stood in comfortable silence. Neither felt the need to fill it with unnecessary words. Sometimes friendship begins that way, not with grand declarations, but with shared work, quiet respect, and the simple realization that life feels a little lighter when someone reliable is standing beside you. Neither Maya nor Elijah said it aloud. Neither was ready to call what was growing between them anything more than friendship, but both sensed the same truth. The annulment hearing was getting closer, and somehow, the thought of becoming strangers again no longer felt as simple as it once had. Before we continue, let's pause for a moment and think about something. Sometimes, the people who change our lives the most aren't the ones who make the grandest promises. They're the ones who quietly show up, lend a hand, listen without judging, and stay when it would be easier to walk away. So here's my question for you. Do you believe true love begins with attraction? Or is it built slowly through friendship, trust, and shared experiences? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read as many as I can, and I'd love to hear your perspective. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Because the journey between Maya and Elijah is about to take an unexpected turn. Just when they begin to trust each other, a hidden truth from the past will threaten everything they've built. Let's continue. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't a phone call. It wasn't a headline. It wasn't even an argument. It was silence. For nearly 3 weeks, Maya and Elijah had settled into an unexpected rhythm. They met with Claire whenever legal documents required signatures. They exchanged occasional text messages about the upcoming annulment hearing. Sometimes Elijah asked how the health clinic plans were progressing. Sometimes Maya checked on Samuel's recovery. Their conversations remained friendly, comfortable, honest, or so Maya believed. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Mercy General Hospital received an unexpected visitor, Claire Donovan. She waited patiently near the nurse's station until Maya finished speaking with a patient's family. "Maya, do you have a few minutes?" "Of course." Claire smiled politely, but something about her expression seemed unusually tense. They stepped into an empty consultation room. "I wanted to give you an update on the court hearing." Maya sat down. "Please tell me we're still on schedule." "We are." Relieved, Maya smiled. "That's good news." "It is." Claire placed a folder on the table. "I also think there's something you deserve to know before we move forward." Maya's smile faded. "What is it?" Claire hesitated for several seconds. "As Elijah's attorney, I was bound by confidentiality." "And?" "As your attorney in the annulment proceedings, I also have a responsibility to make sure you're making informed decisions. Maya felt a knot forming in her stomach. Claire. Hey, what is it? Claire slowly opened the folder. Inside were copies of documents Maya had never seen before. One page carried Samuel Carter's signature. Another contained legal correspondence, dated nearly 6 months before the hospital incident. There was an estate provision, Claire said carefully. You mentioned that before. I didn't explain the full reason. Maya looked up. What reason? Claire folded her hands. Your marriage wasn't planned. You've said that. It truly wasn't. But the legal framework that made the mistake possible already existed. Maya frowned. I don't understand. Years ago, Samuel added an emergency clause to his estate. Why? He feared that if he became medically incapacitated before transferring control of the company, prolonged legal disputes could threaten thousands of employees. Maya nodded slowly. So the paperwork already existed? Yes. She looked directly at Claire. Did Elijah know? Claire lowered her eyes. He knew the clause existed. Maya's heartbeat quickened. He knew? He knew his grandfather had prepared emergency marriage authorization documents. Silence. Heavy, uncomfortable silence. Maya stared at the papers without really seeing them. One question echoed louder than all the others. Did he tell me? Claire answered quietly. No. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. Maya remembered every conversation she'd had with Elijah, every apology, every reassurance, every moment when she'd believed they were finally being honest with each other. You told me, Maya whispered, almost to herself, that neither of you had any idea. Claire chose her words carefully. The filing mistake genuinely surprised him. But he knew those documents existed. Yes. And he never mentioned that. No. Maya leaned back in her chair. Her chest tightened, not because of the legal documents, but because of something much older, much deeper. She wasn't looking at Claire anymore. She was seeing another kitchen, another table, another promise. She was 12 years old again. Her father stood by the front door holding an old suitcase. I'll be back before your birthday. She remembered believing him. She remembered waiting by the living room window every afternoon for nearly 2 weeks. He never came. Months later, he'd return carrying gifts instead of explanations. When she'd asked why he hadn't called, he'd smiled awkwardly. I didn't want to worry you. Those words had stayed with her for years. Not because of what they meant, because of what they revealed. He believed deciding what she should know was somehow an act of love. She had promised herself that no one would ever do that to her again. Now another man had made the same choice. Different circumstances, different intentions, the same wound. Claire watched the color drain from Maya's face. I'm so sorry. Maya closed the folder. I need some air. She stood before Claire could stop her. Outside the hospital, autumn had begun to settle over Chicago. Leaves drifted across the sidewalk as a cool breeze carried the scent of rain. Maya sat alone on a bench beneath an old maple tree. She wasn't angry because Elijah knew about the documents. She was angry because he had decided she didn't need to know. He had made a choice for her, without asking, without trusting her to handle the truth. Her phone buzzed. It was Elijah. How's your day going? She stared at the message. Only yesterday she would have smiled before replying. Today, she couldn't. She locked her phone without answering. Across the city, Elijah looked at the unanswered message and frowned. It wasn't like Maya to ignore him. He told himself she was probably busy. He had no idea that the silence between them had already begun. And sometimes, silence says the things words never could. Elijah tried calling again that evening. No answer. He waited an hour before sending another message. I hope everything's okay. Let me know if you need anything. Still nothing. By the following morning, concern had replaced confusion. This wasn't like Maya. Even on her busiest days, she always replied with a short message. Busy, long shift, talk later, anything. Now, there was only silence. He called Claire. Have you spoken with Maya? Claire hesitated. I met with her yesterday. Something in her voice made Elijah stand from his desk. What happened? I told her about your grandfather's emergency estate provision. He closed his eyes. You told her? She deserved to know. I know. She also learned that you knew the provision existed. The room fell quiet. Elijah rested one hand on the back of his chair. Is she angry? Claire answered honestly. I don't think anger is the right word. What is? Hurt. Those 5 letters landed harder than any accusation. Late that afternoon, Maya finished her shift and walked toward the employee parking lot. She had almost reached her car when she heard footsteps behind her. Maya! She stopped, but didn't turn around immediately. She already recognized the voice. When she finally faced him, Elijah stood several feet away. He hadn't rushed toward her. He hadn't reached for her hand. He simply stood there, giving her space. "I wasn't sure you'd want to see me," he said quietly. His expression tightened, but he nodded. "I understand. Do you?" "I think I'm starting to." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Maya spoke. "Did you know?" "Yes." "The documents?" "Yes." "You knew they existed?" "I did. And you never told me." "I should have." She looked at him, waiting. No excuses came. No attempts to shift the blame. Only the truth. "I thought it would make everything worse." Her eyes filled with disappointment. "You decided that for me." "I know. You didn't even give me the chance to decide how I felt. I kept telling myself we were finally being honest with each other." "We were." "Were we?" He couldn't answer. "Because she was right. Not completely. I wasn't trying to deceive you." "I believe that." Her answer surprised him. "But, do you know what hurts?" "What?" "That you believed protecting me meant keeping me in the dark." She looked away for a moment, before continuing. "My father used to do that." Elijah listened without interrupting. He'd disappear for weeks. When he finally came home, he'd say he didn't tell us because he didn't want us to worry. She laughed bitterly. It sounded loving. It wasn't. It was control. She looked back at him. He made decisions about my life without letting me be part of them. The words settled heavily between them. Elijah finally understood. This wasn't about legal paperwork. It wasn't even about the accidental marriage. It was about an old wound reopening because of a familiar pattern. "I am not your father," he said softly. "I know. But, yesterday," her voice cracked. "It felt like you were standing in the same place he used to stand." For the first time in years, Elijah felt completely helpless. Not because he didn't know how to solve a problem, because he couldn't erase pain he had already caused. "I'm sorry." Maya shook her head gently. "I know you're sorry. But an apology doesn't immediately rebuild trust." "No, it doesn't." She took a slow breath. "I need some time." "I'll give it to you." He wanted to say more, to explain every reason he had stayed silent. But he realized something important. Explanations can become excuses when someone is hurting. Instead, he simply nodded. "I'll be here when you're ready." Maya looked at him one last time before getting into her car. As she drove away, Elijah remained standing in the parking lot. He didn't try to stop her. Love, he was beginning to learn, wasn't proven by holding on tighter. Sometimes it was proven by respecting the space someone needed to heal. That evening, Samuel noticed immediately that something was wrong. "You look like a man carrying a mountain." Elijah managed a tired smile. "I made a mistake." Samuel folded the newspaper in his lap. "A business mistake?" "No. A personal one." Samuel waited. Elijah told him everything. When he finished, the older man remained silent for several moments. Finally, he spoke. "Do you know why your grandmother trusted me?" "I assume because you loved her." Samuel smiled gently. "No. She trusted me because when I made mistakes." He paused. "I stopped trying to prove I meant well and started proving I could do better." Elijah thought carefully about those words. Intentions matter. "They do." Samuel nodded. "But the person who's hurting experiences the impact first." He looked directly at his grandson. "If you want Maya to trust you again, don't ask her to forget what happened." "Then what do I do?" "You become the kind of man who never repeats it." Meanwhile, Maya sat alone on the balcony of her apartment. The city lights shimmered in the distance. Jordan stepped outside carrying 2 mugs of hot tea. "You've been out here a while." "I needed to think." He handed her a mug. "You want to talk?" She nodded. I believed him. Jordan didn't interrupt. I believed we were building something honest. She stared into the rising steam. "The hardest part isn't that he kept something from me. It's that I don't know how to trust my own judgment anymore." Jordan leaned against the railing. "You know what Mom used to say?" Maya smiled faintly. "One mistake tells you something. Repeated mistakes tell you everything." He nodded. "So don't decide who Elijah is because of one failure." She looked at him. "But don't ignore it either." She smiled sadly. "You sound like Mom." "I've had a good teacher." For the first time that day, Maya felt a small sense of peace. Not because the problem had been solved, but because she realized something important. Forgiveness and trust were not the same thing. A person could forgive, and still need time before trusting again. As the cool evening breeze drifted across the balcony, Maya whispered a quiet prayer, not for an easy answer, but for the wisdom to recognize whether someone's actions truly reflected a changed heart. Far across the city, Elijah sat alone in his office, staring at his phone. He didn't send another message. He didn't ask Claire to intervene. He didn't try to explain himself again. Instead, he opened a blank notebook and wrote a single sentence across the top of the page. Trust isn't restored by promises. It's restored by patterns. For the first time in his life, he understood that love wasn't about convincing someone to stay. It was about becoming someone worthy of being trusted, if they chose to return. 2 weeks passed. For the first time since the accidental marriage, Maya and Elijah had no contact. No phone calls, no text messages, no unexpected lunches, no conversations about community clinics or legal paperwork, only silence. It wasn't the angry silence that follows an argument. It was the cautious silence that follows disappointment. Both understood that words spoken too soon often healed nothing. So, they stayed apart. Maya poured herself into work. If she wasn't caring for patients, she was volunteering at the community center, or revising the clinic proposal she had dreamed about for years. Every spare moment became an opportunity to keep moving, because standing still meant thinking, and thinking inevitably brought her back to Elijah. One Thursday afternoon, Denise found Maya reorganizing a supply closet that had already been organized twice. "You've alphabetized bandages." Maya didn't look up. "I know. There are only 3 kinds." "I know." Denise folded her arms. So? Are you going to tell me what's really going on?" Maya finally sighed. "We had a disagreement." "About the marriage?" "About trust." Denise nodded slowly. "The harder conversation." Maya leaned against the shelf. "I keep asking myself the same question." "What question?" "If someone hurts you without meaning to." She paused. "Does that make it easier to forgive?" Denise thought for a moment. "It might make forgiveness easier. But it doesn't automatically make trusting easier." Maya smiled faintly. "That's exactly where I am." Denise placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Then don't rush yourself. People think forgiveness is a finish line. It isn't. It's the beginning of rebuilding." Across the city, Elijah's grandfather had finally returned home. Samuel insisted on walking through his garden despite his doctor's instructions to take things slowly. Elijah matched his pace. "You've been unusually quiet," Samuel observed. "I'm learning." "Learning what?" "That fixing business problems and fixing relationships require completely different skills." Samuel chuckled. "You've finally discovered that spreadsheets don't solve broken hearts." "I wish I'd learned sooner." They reached a wooden bench overlooking a small pond. Samuel sat carefully. "What have you done since Maya asked for space?" "Nothing." Samuel looked surprised. "Nothing?" "I wanted to. I wanted to explain myself. I wanted to apologize again. But then I remembered what you said." Samuel smiled. "And what did I say?" "Don't ask someone to trust your words when they asked for your actions." Samuel nodded approvingly. "So instead, I've been working on becoming the person I should have been from the beginning." "What does that look like?" Elijah smiled slightly. "I started seeing a therapist." Samuel's eyebrows lifted. "You did?" "I realized I solve everything by controlling it. Business rewards that. But relationships don't." Samuel couldn't hide his pride. "Your grandmother would have smiled hearing that." The following week, Maya attended a planning meeting for the neighborhood health fair. As volunteers discussed budgets and scheduling, the center director entered carrying an envelope. "Maya?" "Yes?" "This was delivered for you." She looked at the handwritten name on the front. No return address. Inside was a cashier's check. $500,000. Attached to it was a short note. "For the clinic, no publicity, no announcements, no expectations. Please use it only if it helps your community." There was no signature, but Maya immediately recognized the handwriting. She folded the note without saying a word. Later that evening, she drove to Carter Global's headquarters. Claire greeted her in the lobby. "Maya, I need to speak with Elijah." Claire smiled gently. "He's upstairs." When Maya entered his office, Elijah looked genuinely surprised. "I wasn't expecting you." She placed the check on his desk. "I can't accept this." He looked down. "I thought you might say that. It's too much. It isn't for you. It still came from you." He nodded. "Yes." She slid the check closer to him. "I don't want you to think money can solve this." He looked directly into her eyes. I don't. Then why? Because children in your neighborhood shouldn't have to wait for adults to figure out their personal lives. The room became quiet. I made the donation because I believe in the clinic. Not because I expected anything from you. Maya studied his face. There was no pressure, no hidden condition, no request, just sincerity. She pushed the check back toward him. I still can't take it. He smiled softly. I was hoping you'd say that. She frowned. What? I already donated it. What? The money belongs to the Carter Foundation now. He reached into a drawer and handed her another document. The foundation's board approved a grant this morning. She looked at the paperwork. The grant recipient wasn't Maya Brooks. It was the Southside Community Health Initiative, managed by an independent non-profit. The funds could never be returned to him. Maya looked back at Elijah. You planned this. I planned to remove myself from the decision. So whether we're friends, strangers, or eventually divorced. He shrugged. The community still benefits. For the first time since their painful conversation outside the hospital, Maya felt something she hadn't expected. Respect. Not because Elijah had donated money, but because he had made sure the gift asked for nothing in return. As she prepared to leave, she stopped at the doorway. Thank you. He nodded. You're welcome. Neither of them mentioned trust. Neither mentioned the marriage. Some things were still too fragile, but both quietly recognized a truth neither had understood before. Real change isn't announced. It's demonstrated. And sometimes the most meaningful apology is a life lived differently, one decision at a time. Outside, Maya walked toward her car beneath the fading evening sky. She wasn't ready to trust Elijah again. Not yet. But for the first time in weeks, she wondered if the man standing in that office was slowly becoming someone she could. 3 days after Maya visited Elijah's office, Claire called with news neither of them had been expecting. The court has confirmed the hearing, she said over a conference call. Next Thursday at 9 o'clock. Maya looked down at the calendar on her kitchen counter. So, this is really happening? Yes, Claire replied. Unless something changes, the judge will hear your petition for an annulment. After the call ended, Maya remained seated long after the screen went dark. For weeks, ending the marriage had been all she wanted. Now that the day had finally arrived, the certainty she once felt seemed strangely quieter. She didn't mistake that feeling for love. It was something else. Questions. Questions she hadn't expected to have. Across town, Elijah sat alone in his therapist's office. Dr. Rebecca Lawson waited patiently. You've been unusually thoughtful today, she observed. I've been thinking about the hearing. What worries you most? He didn't answer immediately. Finally, he spoke. I'm afraid I'll make the same mistake again. What mistake? Trying to fix someone's pain instead of listening to it. Doctor, Lawson nodded. When did you learn that fixing problems was your responsibility? He smiled faintly. When my mother died. The words came more easily than they once would have. My grandfather was grieving. The company was struggling. I was 16. So you became the responsible one. I thought I had to. And now? I realize people aren't projects. They don't need someone to manage their emotions. They need someone willing to understand them. Dr. Lawson smiled. That's an important difference. He nodded slowly. I wish I'd learned it before hurting Maya. Meanwhile, Maya met Jordan for dinner at their favorite neighborhood restaurant. As always, he ordered too much food. You still think I eat like I'm 17, Maya teased. You still skip meals when you're stressed. He pushed a basket of warm bread toward her. So, the hearing's next week. She nodded. It is. You nervous? A little. He waited. She appreciated that about her brother. He never rushed her answers. Finally, she spoke. I keep replaying everything. The hospital, the paperwork, the fundraiser, the health fair, the secret. Jordan stirred his iced tea. When you think about Elijah. She looked up. Well, what's the first word that comes to mind? She expected the answer to come easily. Instead, she found herself thinking, complicated. He smiled. That's not a bad sign. It isn't? No. A bad sign would have been if your first word was manipulative or cruel. She laughed softly. I don't think he's either of those things. So what is he? She looked out the window. I think... She paused. He's someone who's learning. Jordan nodded. So are you. The night before the hearing, Samuel asked Elijah to wheel him onto the back porch. Autumn leaves drifted across the lawn. For several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, Samuel broke the silence. Do you love her? Elijah looked toward the trees. Yes. When did you know? I don't think there was one moment. Samuel smiled knowingly. There rarely is. It happened slowly. Watching her care for people. Hearing her talk about that clinic. Seeing her treat everyone with the same respect. He laughed quietly. She never cared who I was. Only whether I was becoming a better man. Samuel rested a hand on his grandson's arm. Then promise me something. What? If she chooses to leave. He looked directly into Elijah's eyes. Let her leave with dignity. Elijah lowered his head. I will. And if she chooses to stay? I'll spend the rest of my life making sure she never regrets it. Samuel smiled. Now you sound like a husband. Thursday morning arrived cold and clear. The courthouse steps were already crowded with reporters. Camera flashes lit up the entrance. This time, however, Maya wasn't alone. Jordan walked beside her. On the opposite side of the plaza, Elijah arrived with Claire and Samuel, who insisted on attending despite his doctor's objections. When Maya noticed the older man, she immediately crossed the plaza. You shouldn't be out in this weather. Samuel chuckled. My doctor said the same thing. She adjusted the blanket covering his knees. You need to take care of yourself. I intend to. He looked at her warmly. Thank you for coming. She smiled gently. I came because of the hearing. I know, but I'm still glad I got to see you. Before anyone else could speak, a court officer opened the doors. They're ready for you. The hearing itself lasted less than an hour. The judge reviewed the paperwork, listened to testimony from Claire, confirmed that the marriage had resulted from an extraordinary administrative error. Finally, she looked at Maya. Ms. Brooks. Yes, Your Honor. Do you still wish to proceed with the annulment? Maya took a slow breath. She looked at the judge, then at Claire, then, almost without meaning to, at Elijah. He didn't plead. He didn't interrupt. He simply met her eyes with quiet respect. The same respect he had shown every day since she asked for space. She answered carefully, yes. The judge nodded, then turned to Elijah. Mr. Carter? He stood. Before I answer. He paused. May I say something? The judge considered the request before nodding. You may. The courtroom became perfectly still. Elijah faced the bench, but spoke toward Maya. I came here today, prepared to sign whatever was placed in front of me. His voice was calm, because I promised myself I would never again make a decision that belonged to someone else. He took a slow breath. I also need to tell the truth. He looked directly at Maya. I love you. The words hung in the silence. I don't expect those words to change your decision. I don't expect forgiveness. And I certainly don't expect another chance, simply because I asked for one. He swallowed hard. But if I walked out of this courtroom without telling you how deeply you've changed my life, I would regret it for the rest of my days. He lowered his eyes briefly before continuing. You taught me that leadership begins with listening. You taught me that generosity means nothing without humility. And you taught me that trust isn't something we deserve. It's something we earn. He looked back at her. So if your decision today is to end this marriage, he nodded slowly. I'll respect it. Completely. But I needed you to know. A faint emotional smile crossed his face. That accidentally becoming your husband was never the best thing that happened to me. Choosing to become a better man because I met you was. The courtroom remained silent. Even the reporters had stopped writing. Maya felt tears gathering in her eyes. Not because she suddenly knew the answer, but because, for the first time, she believed every word he said. The judge quietly folded her hands. I'll allow the parties a short recess before I issue my ruling. As everyone slowly stood, neither Maya nor Elijah moved. The decision they had once believed would be simple had become anything but. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with certainty. Sometimes it arrives with the difficult realization that two good people must decide whether the pain they've caused each other can become the foundation for something stronger, or the reason they finally let go. The courthouse hallway was unusually quiet. Reporters remained outside, waiting for a statement that never came. Inside, Maya stood alone near a tall window overlooking the city. Elijah's words echoed in her mind. I love you. She had imagined countless ways this hearing might unfold. An argument, a legal debate, a quick signature. She had never imagined a confession that asked for nothing in return. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Mind if I join you? It was Judge Eleanor Whitmore. Without her robe, she looked less like a judge and more like a grandmother stopping to check on someone. Of course, Maya replied. The judge stood beside her, looking out at the skyline. I've been on this bench for 23 years, she said. I've seen couples fight over houses, businesses, children, even family recipes. A faint smile crossed Maya's face. But the hardest cases, the judge paused, are the ones where neither person is trying to hurt the other. Maya lowered her eyes. I don't know what the right decision is. You don't have to know today. Maya looked surprised. What do you mean? The law allows me some flexibility under these circumstances. She turned toward Maya. You've both experienced an extraordinary situation. Rushing either of you into a permanent legal decision may not serve justice. Maya listened carefully. I can't tell you what to choose. The judge smiled kindly. But I can encourage you not to confuse clarity with urgency. Those words settled gently in Maya's heart. Sometimes people believed they needed immediate answers simply because life had asked difficult questions. Maybe they didn't. Back inside the courtroom, Judge Whitmore addressed both parties. After reviewing the unusual circumstances surrounding this case, I am postponing my final ruling for 90 days. A murmur spread through the gallery. The purpose of this delay is not to preserve the marriage. She looked at both Maya and Elijah. It is to ensure that whatever decision is ultimately made reflects careful thought rather than emotional exhaustion. She closed the file. At the end of 90 days, either party may request that the annulment proceed without prejudice. Her gavel struck once. Court is adjourned. Within minutes, reporters rushed toward the courthouse steps. Questions echoed across the plaza. Mrs. Carter. Mr. Carter. Does this mean you're staying married? Neither answered. As cameras flashed, Maya looked toward Elijah. I think we should leave separately. He nodded. I agree. There was no awkwardness, no resentment, just mutual understanding. Before walking away, Elijah spoke quietly. I meant everything I said. Maya met his eyes. I know. It wasn't the answer he hoped for, but it was honest. And honesty, he reminded himself, was exactly what she deserved. Over the next several weeks, they honored the space between them. Elijah stopped asking Claire for updates about Maya. He focused instead on the promises he had made to himself. Therapy became a regular part of his routine. Every Tuesday afternoon. No cancellations, no excuses. During one session, Dr. Lawson asked him a question he couldn't ignore. When people disappoint you, what do you usually do? I work harder. And when you're afraid? I work even harder. She nodded. So success became your hiding place. He laughed softly. I've never thought of it that way. What if success isn't the same as healing? That question stayed with him long after the session ended. Instead of returning to the office, he drove to one of the Carter Foundation's community clinics, not for a ribbon cutting, not for photographs. He spent the afternoon speaking with nurses, receptionists, and patients. Mostly he listened. One elderly man smiled after recognizing him. I expected a billionaire. Elijah laughed. What did you get? A fellow who's finally asking the right questions. For reasons he couldn't explain, that compliment meant more than any business award he'd ever received. Across town, Maya threw herself into preparing the community clinic proposal. The foundation's grant had attracted additional donors. Architects volunteered their time. Local contractors offered discounted labor. The dream that had lived inside a worn notebook for nearly a decade was slowly becoming real. One Saturday morning, she met with a group of nursing students interested in volunteering. A young woman named Tasha stayed behind after the meeting. Can I ask you something? Of course. How do you keep believing in people? The question caught Maya off guard. What makes you ask? My parents went through a difficult divorce. Tasha looked embarrassed. Sometimes I feel like trusting anyone is just setting myself up to get hurt. Maya thought for a long moment before answering. I don't think trusting people means believing they'll never disappoint you. She smiled gently. I think it means believing that disappointment doesn't have to be the end of every story. Tasha nodded thoughtfully. That's different from what I expected. It took me a long time to learn. As Tasha walked away, Maya realized she had been speaking as much to herself as to the student. Healing wasn't pretending pain never happened. It was refusing to let pain become the only thing that shaped the future. One crisp October afternoon, Claire called Maya. I thought you'd like to know. Know what? The foundation approved another grant. For the clinic? Yes. Maya smiled. Did Elijah? Claire interrupted gently. He wasn't in the meeting. He specifically removed himself from every vote involving your project. Maya remained silent. He said it would only be fair if the board evaluated it on its own merits. After the call ended, Maya sat quietly in her office. Months earlier, Elijah would have stepped in, solved the problem himself, and expected everyone to trust his intentions. Now, he was choosing restraint. He was creating room for others to make decisions. For the first time, Maya saw undeniable evidence that his change wasn't temporary. It was becoming part of who he was. And somewhere across the city, without either of them realizing it, the distance between them was no longer measured in miles. It was measured in growth. Sometimes the healthiest step two people can take isn't moving closer. It's becoming the kind of people who, if they ever meet again, can build something stronger than they could have before. November arrived with crisp mornings and streets covered in shades of gold and crimson. For nearly 2 months, Maya and Elijah had lived separate lives. There were no accidental meetings, no carefully arranged encounters, no messages sent late at night. The silence between them was no longer painful. It had become peaceful. For the first time since the courthouse hearing, both had stopped measuring their days by what the other was doing. Instead, they had begun measuring them by who they were becoming. One Wednesday morning, Maya stood inside the old pharmacy building that would soon become the Southside Community Health Clinic. Construction crews moved carefully through the empty rooms. Fresh drywall covered walls that had once been cracked and stained. Electricians installed new lighting. Plumbers tested water lines. The building no longer looked abandoned. It looked hopeful. Maya walked slowly through what would soon become the children's waiting area. She closed her eyes and imagined colorful books on shelves. Parents filling out forms. Doctors greeting patients by name. It still felt unreal. A decade of dreaming was finally taking shape. "Miss Brooks?" She turned to see the project manager approaching with a clipboard. "We've run into a small problem." Her smile faded. "What happened?" "The cost of the medical equipment increased." "How much?" He handed her the updated estimate. Maya's heart sank. Even after the grants and donations, they were still short by nearly $200,000. She stared at the numbers for several moments. Months ago, she would have known exactly what to do. She would have called Elijah. Today, she folded the estimate and slipped it into her notebook. "We'll figure it out." The project manager smiled. "I figured you'd say that." That same afternoon, Elijah visited one of the Carter Foundation's scholarship recipients. Emily Sanders had recently graduated from nursing school and invited him to see the rural clinic where she had accepted her first job. Unlike many of his business trips, this one involved no media coverage. Just a quiet drive through small Illinois towns. Emily greeted him outside the clinic. "I still can't believe you're here. I promised I'd visit." She laughed. "I honestly thought that was just something people with busy schedules say." So did I. They spent the afternoon touring the small facility. Emily proudly introduced him to patients he had come to know by name. An elderly farmer recovering from surgery. A young mother bringing in her twins for vaccinations. A retired teacher who never missed her blood pressure checks. On the drive back to Chicago, Elijah found himself smiling. Success used to mean closing another deal. Now it meant seeing someone else succeed because they had been given an opportunity. His phone buzzed. It was Claire. "Sorry to interrupt your drive." "No problem. I thought you should know." "What is it?" "The clinic project is facing a funding gap." Elijah tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "How much?" Claire told him. He remained quiet. "I know what you're thinking," she continued. He smiled faintly. "No, you do. You want to help." "Yes. But you also know Maya wouldn't want you solving the problem for her." He nodded. "You're right. What are you going to do?" He looked through the windshield for a long moment. "The same thing everyone else has to do." "And what's that?" "I'm going to trust that she'll find a way." Claire smiled. "You've changed." "I hope so." The following Saturday, Maya organized another volunteer planning session. Attendance was better than ever. Doctors donated equipment. A local grocery chain offered healthy snacks for patients. A retired accountant volunteered to manage the clinic's finances. As everyone prepared to leave, an elderly woman approached Maya. "You don't remember me, do you?" Maya studied her face before smiling. "Mrs. Alvarez." The woman laughed. "I knew you would." Years earlier, Maya had cared for Mrs. Alvarez after a complicated surgery. "You stayed with me until my daughter arrived." Mrs. Alvarez reached into her purse. "I've been saving this." She handed Maya an envelope. Inside was a modest donation, only $500. Mrs. Alvarez looked embarrassed. "I wish it were more." Maya immediately shook her head. "It's perfect. No amount is too small when it comes from the heart." Mrs. Alvarez smiled through tears. "You taught me that kindness grows when people pass it forward." As the woman walked away, Maya carefully placed the envelope inside her notebook. It wasn't the largest donation. It wasn't even close. Yet somehow, it felt like one of the most meaningful. A week later, The Carter Foundation hosted its annual volunteer appreciation dinner. Unlike previous events, this year's gathering honored community leaders rather than donors. Claire had invited Maya months earlier. She almost declined. Then she realized the evening wasn't about Elijah. It was about the volunteers who had helped make the clinic possible. When she entered the ballroom, she immediately noticed something different. There were no reserved VIP tables, no elaborate stage. Instead, volunteers, nurses, teachers, and non-profit workers sat together without titles or special seating. She smiled. Someone had changed the format. Halfway through dinner, the Foundation's executive director stepped onto the stage. This year's Community Leadership Award goes to someone whose vision reminded us that healthcare begins long before someone enters a hospital. A large photograph appeared on the screen behind him. It showed children gathered outside the future clinic, laughing as volunteers painted a mural on the building. Maya Brooks. The room erupted in applause. Maya looked genuinely stunned. She slowly walked to the stage. As she accepted the award, she noticed Elijah standing near the back of the room. He wasn't on stage. He wasn't introducing her. He wasn't even sitting at the head table. He applauded with everyone else. Nothing more. When Maya finished her short speech, she stepped down from the stage. Elijah waited until the crowd dispersed before approaching. Congratulations. Thank you. I didn't know. I know. She looked at him curiously. You really didn't arrange this? He smiled. I wasn't even on the selection committee. She laughed softly. I believe you. Those 3 words stopped him. Not because they were dramatic, because they represented something he had nearly lost. She believed him. Maybe not completely, maybe not yet, but enough to say the words honestly. There was a comfortable pause before Maya spoke again. I heard you visited Emily Sanders. He looked surprised. Claire talks too much. Maya laughed. Emily spoke at one of our volunteer meetings. She's doing well. She said you stayed all afternoon. I had nowhere more important to be. Maya nodded. I think the old Elijah would have rushed back to the office. I think so too. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Maya smiled. I'm glad you didn't. As the evening came to an end, they walked toward the exit together. Not as husband and wife. Not as strangers. Simply as 2 people who had spent months learning one important truth. Real change doesn't happen in a single conversation. It happens quietly, one decision at a time. One act of humility. One honest choice. One opportunity to become better than the person you were yesterday. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall. Maya looked up and smiled. It's going to be a long winter. Elijah slipped his hands into his coat pockets. Maybe? He looked at the softly falling snow. But I don't think either of us is the same person who walked into that courthouse. Maya looked at him for a moment before nodding. No. We're not. And for the first time since their lives had collided because of one ordinary signature, the future no longer felt like something to fear. It felt like something they were finally ready to face. Whatever it might become by early spring, Chicago had begun to wake from winter. The trees lining the neighborhood streets were dotted with fresh green leaves, and the construction fence surrounding the future Southside Community Health Clinic had finally come down. After months of planning, fundraising, and countless volunteer hours, the building looked almost ready. Maya stood on the sidewalk across the street, staring at the newly painted entrance. It wasn't the largest clinic in the city. It wasn't the most modern. But it represented something she had carried in her heart for nearly 10 years. A dream that had survived disappointment, long shifts, financial setbacks, and more than one reason to give up. Beautiful, isn't it? Maya turned. Jordan stood beside her with 2 cups of coffee. She accepted one gratefully. I still can't believe it's real. He smiled. You earned every brick. She laughed softly. Not every brick. You know what I mean. For a few quiet moments, they admired the building in silence. Then Jordan asked the question he had been holding back. Have you talked to Elijah lately? Maya shook her head. Not since the volunteer dinner. And? That's okay. Jordan nodded. You don't miss him? She looked down at her coffee. I miss talking to him. That's different. It is. I don't miss depending on him. I don't miss the confusion. But I do miss having someone who genuinely wanted to understand me. Jordan smiled knowingly. Sounds like progress. Maybe. Across town, Elijah stood inside one of Carter Global's conference rooms. The quarterly board meeting had just ended. For years, these meetings had consumed his life. Today, something was different. As executives gathered their files, Elijah remained seated. I have one more announcement. The room quieted. I'll be stepping down as acting chairman of the Carter Foundation. Several people exchanged surprised glances. His chief financial officer frowned. Is everything all right? Everything's fine. So why resign? I'm not leaving. I'm simply creating room for people with more experience in community healthcare to lead those decisions. The executive director smiled. You've always believed leadership meant making every decision yourself. Elijah returned the smile. I used to. What changed? He thought for a moment. I learned that sometimes the strongest leader is the one willing to step aside. The room remained quiet. Everyone understood the significance of what he was saying. It wasn't only about the foundation, it was about him. 1 week later, Mercy General Hospital hosted its annual Community Health Partnership Conference. Medical professionals from across Illinois attended workshops, presentations, and networking events. Maya had been invited to speak about neighborhood healthcare initiatives. She spent most of the morning answering questions from nurses and nonprofit organizations. As she stepped off the stage after her presentation, a familiar voice spoke behind her. That was the best presentation I've heard all year. She turned slowly. Elijah. He looked almost exactly the same, yet somehow different, more relaxed, less guarded. What are you doing here? She asked. The foundation sponsors one of the education programs. She smiled. Of course it does. An awkward silence threatened to settle between them. Finally, Elijah spoke. I almost didn't come over. Why? I wasn't sure you'd want to see me. She considered that. I'm glad you did. He looked relieved. So am I. For a moment, neither of them knew what to say. Then Maya laughed. This is strange. A little. We used to talk for hours. I remember. And now we're standing here discussing conference schedules. He smiled. I suppose we have to start somewhere. I suppose we do. Later that afternoon, conference attendees gathered for lunch in the hospital courtyard. Most tables were already full. Maya looked around before spotting Elijah sitting alone beneath a flowering tree. She hesitated only briefly before walking over. Mind if I join you? He looked genuinely surprised. Please. She sat. For several minutes, they simply ate. Not because the silence was uncomfortable, because it wasn't. Eventually Maya broke it. Claire told me you stepped down from the foundation. He nodded. I did. Why? I realized I'd spent too much of my life believing I had to be involved in everything. And now? Now I'm learning that trust means allowing other people to succeed without needing my approval. She smiled. That sounds like something your therapist would say. He laughed. You're not wrong. She looked at him carefully. You've kept going? Every Tuesday. No missed appointments. I'm proud of you. The words escaped before she realized she had spoken them. Elijah looked down for a moment. Thank you. It hasn't always been easy. I didn't think it would be. She studied him quietly. Months earlier, he would have told her about promotions, investments, and business expansions. Today, he spoke about growth that couldn't be measured on a balance sheet. It reminded her of something her mother once said. The hardest victories are the ones nobody else can see. As lunch came to an end, the conference coordinator hurried toward Maya. There you are. We've got a small problem. What happened? Our keynote speaker is stuck at the airport. Maya frowned. The closing session starts in 20 minutes. We know. The coordinator sighed. We need someone to moderate a discussion panel instead. Maya looked around the courtyard. Who else is available? The coordinator followed her gaze. What about Mr. Carter? Elijah immediately shook his head. I wasn't planning to speak. The coordinator smiled apologetically. Neither was our keynote speaker. Maya looked at him. You've gotten pretty good at listening. He laughed. I have. Then maybe that's exactly what this panel needs. For a second, he hesitated. Then he nodded. All right. The panel turned out to be the most engaging session of the conference. Instead of delivering prepared speeches, Elijah asked thoughtful questions. He invited nurses, social workers, physicians, and volunteers to share their experiences. He interrupted no one. He redirected praise toward the people doing the work. As the audience applauded at the end, Maya found herself smiling. Not because Elijah had impressed anyone, but because he had become the kind of man who no longer needed to. Sometimes, the strongest evidence that someone has changed isn't found in what they say. It's found in the person they've quietly become while no one was watching. The applause from the conference slowly faded as attendees gathered their notebooks and coffee cups. Several nurses stopped Maya in the hallway to thank her for her presentation. Others approached Elijah, not to ask about his company, but to thank him for listening. One elderly physician smiled as he shook Elijah's hand. You reminded a room full of professionals that leadership starts with asking good questions. Elijah smiled modestly. I learned that lesson from someone else. His eyes briefly met Maya's. She noticed, but neither of them said anything. Later that afternoon, Maya found herself walking through Mercy General's healing garden before heading home. The garden had always been her favorite place in the hospital. Patients came there after difficult diagnoses. Families gathered there after long surgeries. Some celebrated recoveries. Others quietly said goodbye. It reminded her that every season of life eventually changed. She heard footsteps behind her. I figured I'd find you here. Elijah stopped several feet away. I remember you telling me this was your favorite place. She smiled. You remembered? I remember a lot. For a few moments, they admired the blooming flowers in silence. Finally, Maya spoke. I owe you an apology. Elijah looked surprised. You don't owe me anything. I do. She turned to face him. When everything fell apart, I stopped believing you could change. He shook his head gently. You had every reason to. Maybe. But I also judged the rest of your story before you had finished living it. Elijah was quiet for a long moment. I appreciate you saying that. She looked down at the stone pathway. I've learned something these past few months. What's that? Protecting your heart is important. She smiled sadly. But if you never open it again, you're only protecting yourself from joy too. Those words hung between them. Not as a declaration, as a realization. The following Saturday marked a major milestone. The Southside Community Health Clinic was ready for its final community inspection before opening. Volunteers, neighborhood leaders, and local families gathered for a walkthrough. Children ran excitedly through the colorful waiting area. Parents admired the examination rooms. Retired nurses signed up to mentor younger staff. Maya walked slowly through the building, greeting everyone by name. She stopped in front of a framed plaque near the entrance. It didn't list major donors. It didn't mention wealthy benefactors. Instead, it read, built by a community that chose to care. She smiled. That was exactly what she had hoped for. Jordan walked over. You should be proud. I'm grateful. They're not the same thing. I know. Before she could respond, Claire approached. Maya, someone wants to speak with you. She turned. Elijah stood near the doorway, holding a small cardboard box. I promise this isn't another surprise donation. She laughed. That's reassuring. He handed her the box. I found these while cleaning out my office. Inside were several copies of the original clinic sketches Maya had forgotten she had shared months earlier, carefully preserved, neatly organized. She looked up. You kept these? I thought they belonged with the finished building. Tucked inside the box was a handwritten note. Dreams deserve witnesses. Thank you for letting me witness yours. Maya folded the note carefully. This means more to me than you know. I'm glad. No grand speech followed. No dramatic confession. Just a quiet moment of appreciation. As guests began leaving that afternoon, Samuel arrived with the help of a cane. His health had improved enough for short outings. The entire neighborhood seemed to recognize him after months of hearing about the foundation's involvement. Samuel slowly walked through the clinic, smiling at every room. When he reached Maya, his eyes filled with emotion. You did it. She shook her head. We did it. No. He smiled warmly. You inspired everyone else to. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed her an old photograph. It showed a much younger Samuel and his late wife standing outside a tiny neighborhood library they had helped restore decades earlier. She used to say something I never forgot. Maya looked at the picture. What was it? The greatest buildings aren't made of bricks. She paused, reading the handwritten words on the back. They're made of people who refuse to stop believing in one another. Maya carefully slipped the photograph back into its envelope. I'll treasure this. I hoped you would. That evening, after the last volunteer had gone home, Maya stepped outside the clinic. The sunset painted the Chicago skyline in shades of orange and gold. She found Elijah sitting quietly on the front steps. You didn't leave. I wanted to make sure everything was cleaned up. She sat beside him. For a while, neither spoke. Then Maya broke the silence. When the hearing was postponed, he looked at her. I thought all I wanted was for the 90 days to end. And now? She smiled softly. Now I realize those 90 days gave both of us something we couldn't have found any other way. What was that? The chance to become better people. Elijah nodded. I was thinking the same thing. She looked toward the clinic entrance. I can't promise what happens next. I'm not asking you to. I still need time. I understand. But... She took a slow breath. I'd like to start getting to know each other again. Without lawyers. He smiled. Without headlines. Without pretending, his smile widened. I'd like that. She stood and offered him her hand. Then let's begin there. He accepted it. Not as a husband reclaiming his wife, but as a man grateful for the opportunity to earn a place in her life once more. As they walked away from the clinic together, the future remained unwritten. There were still conversations to have, still scars to heal, still trust to rebuild. But this time, neither of them was walking because they had been pushed together by circumstance. They were walking because, step by step, they were choosing the same direction. Sometimes trust is built once through hope, and sometimes it must be built a second time through patience, humility, and the quiet courage to believe that people really can change. 6 months later, summer returned to Chicago with warm mornings and sidewalks alive with people walking to work, children riding bicycles and neighborhood cafes setting tables outside once again. For Maya Brooks, life had become wonderfully ordinary. Every weekday she unlocked the front doors of the Southside Community Health Clinic just before 8 o'clock. Patients arrived carrying more than medical concerns. Some needed reassurance. Some needed hope. Some simply needed someone willing to listen. The clinic had become exactly what she had dreamed about all those years ago. Not perfect, but alive. The waiting room walls displayed artwork painted by local children. A bookshelf near the entrance invited patients to take or leave a book. The reception desk greeted everyone by name whenever possible. The building wasn't changing the entire city. It was changing one life at a time. And that, Maya believed, was enough. As she reviewed patient charts one Monday morning, Tasha, the nursing student who had become one of the clinic's first full-time employees, knocked gently on her office door. "You've got a visitor." Maya looked up. "Does the visitor have an appointment?" "No." "Is it urgent?" Tasha smiled knowingly. "I think you'll want to make an exception." Curious, Maya stepped into the hallway. Standing near the reception desk was Elijah. He wasn't carrying flowers. He wasn't dressed in an expensive suit. He held a small paper bag from the neighborhood bakery across the street. "I come in peace," he said with a smile. Maya laughed. "Bribing the clinic director with cinnamon rolls? I was told they're your favorite." "They are." Tasha quietly disappeared down the hallway, giving them privacy. "You didn't have to bring anything," Maya said. "I know. I wanted to." She invited him into her office. It no longer felt strange. Over the past several months, they had rebuilt something carefully. One coffee at a time. One honest conversation at a time. Sometimes they met after work to walk through the neighborhood. Sometimes they spent entire evenings talking about books, family, and childhood memories. Other times, they simply shared quiet moments without feeling the need to fill every silence. Neither of them had mentioned the marriage. Neither had spoken about the postponed hearing. They had agreed to let the relationship grow without allowing legal paperwork to define it. Elijah looked around the office. "You've added more photographs." Maya smiled. Pictures of volunteers, patients celebrating recoveries, neighborhood events, and clinic staff covered one wall. "I wanted people to remember who this place belongs to." He studied one particular photograph showing dozens of volunteers painting the clinic together. "You were right." "About what?" "A community really can build something extraordinary." She poured 2 cups of coffee. "I had help." "You inspired the help." Maya handed him a mug. "I've learned not to take all the credit. And I've learned not to take all the responsibility." They exchanged amused smiles. Growth had quietly changed the way they both spoke. Later that afternoon, the clinic hosted a free wellness workshop for local families. Elijah stayed to help, not because anyone expected him to, because he wanted to. He registered patients, carried boxes of supplies, directed elderly visitors toward examination rooms. When a young boy became nervous before receiving a vaccination, Elijah knelt beside him. "You know something?" The little boy looked uncertain. "When I was your age, I was terrified of shots." "Really?" "I thought they were the scariest thing in the world." "What happened?" "I found out being brave doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you do the right thing anyway." The boy nodded slowly. A few minutes later, he held still while the nurse administered the vaccine. From across the room, Maya watched quietly. She smiled to herself, not because Elijah was trying to impress her. He had no idea she was watching. That was what mattered. Character is who we are when we believe no one is keeping score. As the workshop ended, Samuel arrived with Jordan. The 2 older men had become unlikely friends over the previous months. Jordan pushed Samuel's wheelchair through the clinic, while Samuel admired every room. "I still remember the abandoned pharmacy," Samuel said. "And now look at it." Jordan smiled. Maya refused to give up. Samuel nodded. "So did someone else." He glanced toward Elijah. Jordan followed his gaze. "You know," Jordan said thoughtfully, I wasn't sure I'd ever trust him. Samuel smiled. And now? I trust what I've seen. He paused. Not because he says the right things. Because he keeps doing them. Samuel leaned back with quiet satisfaction. That's the only kind of trust worth having. That evening, after the clinic closed, Maya locked the front door. Elijah waited beside the steps. Walk with me? I'd like that. They wandered slowly through the neighborhood streets. Children chased one another through a nearby park. Families sat on front porches, enjoying the cool evening air. Everything felt peaceful. After several blocks, Maya stopped beside the small community garden volunteers had planted behind the clinic. I've been thinking. Elijah smiled. That usually means an important conversation. It does. She looked directly at him. When we first met. He laughed softly. You accidentally became my wife. She shook her head, smiling. No. When we first truly met. I believed trust was something people either deserved or didn't. And now? I think trust is something we choose to build together. He listened without interrupting. I can't erase what happened. Neither can you. But I don't want either of us to spend the rest of our lives being defined by our worst mistake. Elijah felt emotion rising in his chest. Maya. She gently reached for his hand. This time. She smiled through tears. I'd like our relationship to be built on a decision we both understand. Not obligation, not paperwork, not an accident. A choice. The summer breeze rustled the leaves above them as they stood quietly beneath the fading light. Sometimes life begins with a mistake. Sometimes it offers a second beginning. The difference isn't fate. It's whether two people are willing to choose each other with open eyes, honest hearts, and the courage to keep growing together. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. The quiet community garden around them seemed to hold its breath. Maya still held Elijah's hand. Not tightly, not cautiously, simply, naturally. Elijah searched her face, making sure he understood what she was saying. I don't want to assume, he said softly. Tell me what you mean. Maya smiled. Months ago, I wanted to erase everything. I know. I thought the only way to move forward was to pretend none of this had ever happened. She looked toward the clinic, where the lights inside slowly switched off as the last volunteer finished cleaning. But if I erase everything? She laughed quietly. I'd also erase everything we learned. Elijah listened without interrupting. I don't want the marriage we accidentally signed. She turned back toward him. I want the relationship we intentionally built. Emotion filled his eyes. So do I. She squeezed his hand gently. This time, there will be no surprises. No hidden documents. No decisions made for each other. No pretending to protect one another by hiding the truth. He nodded. I promise. She smiled. No. He looked confused. I don't need another promise. She stepped closer. I need honesty. Even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then. He smiled through misty eyes. You have it. The following week, Maya and Elijah returned to the courthouse. Not because they had to. Because they chose to. Judge Whitmore looked pleasantly surprised when they entered her courtroom. I wasn't expecting to see both of you together. Maya smiled. We've made a decision. The judge folded her hands. I'm listening. Maya glanced at Elijah before speaking. When this process began, I believed the healthiest choice was to end the marriage. She took a steady breath. I still believe that was the right decision at the time. Judge Whitmore nodded thoughtfully. But during these past months, Maya continued, we discovered something important. She reached for Elijah's hand. We never truly had the chance to choose whether we wanted to be married. Elijah spoke next. The legal document came before the relationship. It should have been the other way around. The judge smiled. And now? Maya's answer came without hesitation. Now we're choosing each other. A gentle smile spread across Judge Whitmore's face. Then I believe my work here is very simple. She reviewed the final paperwork before looking up once more. I am officially dismissing the annulment petition at the request of both parties. She paused. I've presided over thousands of cases. Very few have reminded me that love isn't measured by how perfectly it begins. It's measured by the character people develop along the way. She smiled warmly. I wish you both a lifetime of continuing to choose each other. Words spread through the courthouse quickly. Reporters gathered outside, expecting another dramatic confrontation. Instead, Maya and Elijah stepped onto the courthouse steps side by side. Microphones immediately surrounded them. Mr. Carter. Mrs. Carter. Are you staying married? Elijah looked toward Maya. She nodded. He smiled. This time, he looked back at the reporters. Yes. A reporter raised another question. Was it destiny? Maya answered before Elijah could. No. The crowd became quiet. It was accountability. It was forgiveness. It was growth. She smiled warmly. And, most importantly, it was a choice. There were no sensational speeches, no public display designed for headlines. Just two people answering honestly. For once, the truth was more powerful than the rumors. Several months later, the Southside Community Health Clinic celebrated its first anniversary. Hundreds of families attended the community celebration. Children painted murals. Local musicians performed. Volunteers served food. Patients shared stories about how the clinic had changed their lives. Near the entrance hung the same plaque Maya had insisted upon from the beginning, built by a community that chose to care. Beside it, another smaller plaque had recently been added. It read, "Trust is built through truth. Love grows through daily choices." Service gives both meaning. Samuel stood quietly reading the words. "I like this one better," he whispered. Jordan smiled. "So do I." Nearby, Elijah helped children plant flowers around the clinic, while Maya organized free health screenings. Neither sought the spotlight. Neither needed it. When the afternoon crowd finally began to thin, Tasha approached Maya with a grin. "You know." "What?" "I've been watching the two of you all day." Maya laughed. "That sounds dangerous." "You hardly spent any time together." "We've both been working." "Exactly." Tasha smiled knowingly. "You trust each other enough to do your own jobs." Maya looked across the courtyard. Elijah was helping an elderly gentleman load medical supplies into his car. He looked up at exactly the same moment. Their eyes met. No words, just warm smiles. Sometimes, love looked like holding hands. Sometimes, it looked like carrying boxes. Sometimes it looked like giving each other room to serve others. Maya realized she loved all three. That evening, after everyone had gone home, they locked the clinic together. The neighborhood had grown quiet. The setting sun painted the sky with shades of orange and purple. Elijah reached into his jacket pocket. Maya laughed. "If that's another surprise." "It isn't." He handed her a folded piece of paper. She opened it. It was the very first page from the notebook she had started 10 years earlier. Across the bottom, beneath her original handwriting, Elijah had written one sentence. "Thank you for teaching me that the greatest investment I could ever make wasn't in a company. It was in becoming a better man." Tears filled Maya's eyes. She looked up. "I think we finally got our beginning." Elijah smiled. "No." He gently took her hand. "I think we earned it." They walked home together beneath the warm Chicago evening sky. Not because fate had forced their paths together, not because a legal mistake had left them no choice, but because every difficult conversation, every apology, every act of humility, and every quiet sacrifice had slowly transformed an accident into a commitment. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Life can change because of one unexpected decision. But lasting love is never built by accident. It is built one honest conversation, one forgiven mistake, one selfless act, and one intentional choice at a time. And just like that, we've reached the end of Maya and Elijah's journey. If this story taught us anything, it's that love isn't about finding a perfect person. It's about becoming the kind of person who is willing to listen, grow, admit mistakes, and choose honesty every single day. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What was your favorite moment in this story? Was it Elijah's courtroom confession? Maya's dream of opening the community clinic? Or the moment they chose each other, not because of an accident, but because they had earned each other's trust? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read your comments, and they inspire many of the stories you hear on this channel. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Love Stories by Mr. Johnson, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss our next emotional journey filled with love, life lessons, and unforgettable characters. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that trust can be rebuilt, people can change, and true love is a choice, not just a feeling, please share this story with them. Thank you for spending your time with me today. Your support means more than you know. Until next time, take care of yourself, be kind to others, and remember, the smallest decision can change your life, but the choices you make afterward determine the kind of person you become.